Good evening and welcome to the September 14, 2022 meeting of the Edina Planning Commission. The city is committed to continuing to receive and hear your input on matters. We have been collecting public input through voicemail and our engagement website, bettertogetheredina.org. It's important you know that all comments that have been submitted have been received and read prior to the start of this meeting. You do not need to submit the same feedback in another way. All feedback is considered equally, regardless of the way in which it was submitted. Tonight, there is one public hearing. Individuals who want to provide testimony remotely for the public hearing can call 888-504-7949 and enter participant passcode 778-177. Everyone is allowed up to 3 minutes to speak. Please give your full name and address, and staff member Liz Olson will let anyone who calls in know if they've gone over those 3 minutes. And just remember, you do not need to call in or comment live tonight if you've already provided testimony or feedback. And also, please do not repeat any information already presented. Please provide testimony if you have new comments or information to bring forward. And with that, I will call the meeting to order and we will do our roll call.
Commissioner Padilla.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Elkhire.
Here.
Commissioner Gandhi.
Present.
Commissioner Bennett.
Here.
Chair Agnew.
Here. Thank you. So next up is our approval of our meeting agenda. If I could have a motion.
Motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, our agenda has been approved. Next is our approval of our draft minutes from the August 24th meeting. Any updates to those? All right, any motion?
Motion to approve the minutes from the August 24th meeting?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, our minutes from the August 24th meeting have been approved. Next, I want to welcome our first student commissioner. Commissioner Gandhi is with us tonight. Oh, I didn't even warn you about this. Can I put you on the spot and you can say like 2 sentences about like what grade you are in school and what you're interested in?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Hello, my name is Shayan Gandhi. I'm a senior at Edina High School. Some things that I do in my free time is I'm a captain on the Model UN team. I'm part of a group called Mosaic at the school, and I like to play soccer in my free time. So.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And then just so everyone knows, we will have another student member who will be joining the meeting in November. She's just unable to attend until then, but we will give her a warm welcome when that happens. Next is our community comment. So I will invite any residents to speak, to share relevant issues or concerns. Do we have anyone here to provide public comment tonight? Seeing none, we will continue on. The first public hearing on our agenda tonight is a zoning ordinance amendment to revise the PUD 16 zoning district. And tonight, I have Director Teague presenting.
Okay, thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. So this property is located in the Greater Southdale District. It's on the west side of France, guided in our comprehensive plan for office and residential uses, which does allow some commercial. The maximum density on the west side of France is up to 75 units an acre for housing. The site is currently zoned PUD. Back in 2019, there was a project that was approved for the site but never been built. on the screen is a rendering of that project. It was to have about 300 housing units, apartment units, 10 townhomes on the west side of the building, and there was about 30,000 square feet of retail underneath the apartments. Financially, they weren't able to construct that project, and so this is what the site looks like today. 2 office buildings, a large parking lot, a parking ramp that is soon to be torn down, very soon, in fact. So you may recall, most of you, that they did go through the sketch plan review, and this is the project that was proposed at that time. You may recall there was a large grocer that was anticipated on the corner, and surface parking as well as some underground parking. One item of note that's been eliminated from the plan that you'll be seeing this evening is there was a right-in, right-out off of France. This access has been eliminated with the current plan. They've also eliminated that grocery store on the corner. They've enhanced that north-south drive through the site on the west side, enhanced the architecture. The applicant will go through that in a little more detail. And as I mentioned, eliminated that drive off of France. So this is a 2-phase project that's proposed. Phase 1 would consist of about 125,000 square foot office building with a 2,200 square foot coffee shop. There would be underground parking. And note that in phase 1, there would be a surface parking lot, about 83 stalls to serve that office building. Phase 2 would be roughly similar size building. It would be housing, up to 150 units of housing and 10,000 square feet of retail. When that site's ready to develop, they would have to go through this process, and we'd look at the specifics of that building at that time. So what's requested here this evening is a new PUD and an overall development plan. Just some quick renderings of the building. Again, the applicant will go through this in a little more detail. They also have a video for you this evening to fly you through the project. Very well done video. So again, this request it's an ordinance amendment to revise that existing PUD. With planned unit developments, we create a zoning ordinance specific for this site. So this is an entirely new plan, so we'd be creating a new ordinance for the site. I haven't shown this graphic in a while, but it gives us an indication of how much discretion the city has on this. Because this is a rezoning, the city does have complete discretion here. So a quick review of the site plan. So access would be available off of 72nd Street and Gallagher. Access to the underground parking would be off of this north-south drive and bike access through the site. As I noted, there's no access or no vehicular access off of France. That's turned into a pedestrian way and courtyard. A large infiltration basin on the west side. Part of what didn't work on that previous project was it was all underground storage for the stormwater runoff. This site sits low, so it collects drainage from basically all around it. So they're taking on water from not only their site, but all around. So it's a big undertaking here. It's more economical than than that underground vault. So this is a look at the phase 1 where you can see that surface parking lot. What they would do in phase 1 is install all of the landscaping and sidewalks around the perimeter of the site, create that infiltration basin. Basically, it would all be graded. It's just not that the building wouldn't be constructed. Building materials would be brick, metal panels, stone base, and again, the applicant will go through that in a little more detail. So the flexibility that they're requesting through the PUD, setbacks are generally the same. Of note is the Gallagher Drive setback. That previous plan had a 20-foot setback. This is a little bit further back at 25 feet. The planned office district standard or the previous zoning district required a 30-foot setback. The height of the building is 6 stories, similar to the previous project, but it is taller at 84 feet. Floor area ratio is a little bit less than the previous project, and they're also seeking flexibility on the parking. So primary issues for consideration are the proposed changes for this overall plan reasonable to justify a new PUD rezoning for the site. Staff does support the proposal. It still adheres to the Southdale District Design Experience Guidelines in its dividing the site up, creating that north-south public connections through the site, as well as the east-west connections, increasing the public realm on the site, eliminating surface parking stalls. With the completion of Phase 2, there wouldn't be surface parking visible from France. One thing of note, the street typology along France isn't quite met. I'll just go to the next slide. As indicated here, at the 60-foot height mark, we ask that the buildings step in 10 feet. The applicants have stated that they would do that on France Avenue. One thing, that previous proposal, that previous project, 20% of the units were to be affordable within the project. So we would suggest a condition of approval that that future housing site provide the housing units within the development. They also would be seeking LEED certified building with this project and would be subject to the sustainability policy. We believe that meets several goals of the comprehensive plan that I've touched on, with the increase in public space, access through the site, that it also meets the PUD criteria. Again, this is a pedestrian-friendly development. Building will be high quality. The PUD ensures that this is the specific project that has to be built on the site. The reason that we're here for a complete new ordinance for the site, because the only thing that can be built on the site today is that previous project from 2019. 19% of the site would be those public spaces, north-south through the site and east-west. If we were to add the public space along the road frontages, 38% of this project would be made up of public space. We believe that the height is justified in that, you recall, we require a setback to R1 properties 2 times the height of a building. So this building, as I mentioned, 84 feet tall, 168-foot setback is required. I'll show a graphic in a minute that the distance from the nearest single-family home would be about 250 feet, so it meets that requirement. The existing roadways and parking would be supported by this project. Stantec conducted a traffic and parking study. Ed Terhar is with us on the phone this evening and can answer any questions that you may have. But the traffic study concluded that no roadway improvements are needed with this project, and that the proposed parking, there is enough parking to support both phases. So here's that 250-foot separation from the nearest single-family home. We did receive a few comments on Better Together, mostly in favor of the project. There were some concerns in regard to traffic, and as I mentioned, there's no need for roadway improvements with the site. Less traffic would be generated from this project than the previous. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the ordinance amendment, subject to the findings and conditions that are outlined in the staff report. So with that, I can stand for questions.
Thank you so much, Director Teague. What questions do we have? Commissioner Smith.
Hi, good night. Question on the PUD ordinance. So if I understand correctly, because this is a revision to the last proposal, we need a new PUD to be approved. Would we need a new one once they start development in Phase 2 of the new building as well? Or would this approval cover Phase 1 and Phase 2?
Yeah, the approval covers, well, it's final site plan for Phase 1. There would be an overall development plan for the site. When they're ready to develop that north site, they would still have to come back through the Planning Commission and City Council process. It's at that time that we'd look at the building detail, how it connects to the infrastructure that's in place. So there would be an additional review by Planning Commission and Council with that phase 2.
Commissioner Alkire?
Thanks for the presentation. If I understood the materials correctly, it sounds like in this phase 1 approval or consideration, we can set requirements for page 2 or for phase 2, because we're saying we're going to
Yes.
require that the affordable housing be on site. We're going to require the nature of how the space is used. So I understand that. Process-wise, though, there isn't any assurance that the phase 2 surface parking, which is what I'm most focused on, we don't know whether that's going to be there 2 years or 10 years or forever, because there's no accountability in the phase 1 consideration for that particular piece of it. Am I right?
You are correct.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions for the city? Commissioner Padilla?
Yeah, my questions are about the traffic, and thank you for the presentation. It was very good. So right now, there's, as you're going north on France, there's a left turn lane to go on to 72nd. And it's my understanding that there are no plans to change that.
Correct.
Because I sit in that traffic on a daily basis, and it can be, it can be longer than anybody would like before you can turn. So I think in having additional buildings there, we might want to take a closer look at the traffic patterns. I did look at the traffic study. And also, so the pedestrian crossings would only be back up at Hazleton and Gallagher. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. I don't have a graphic here that shows that. Well, that's the sketch.
So no crossing France at either this new streets, which Danielle, I think you called it, right?
Not at this time. That would
Or
be a
72nd.
requirement through, being that it's a county road, we would have to seek a crossing from them. But there's not one proposed in this plan.
As well as any kind of monitoring as well, I mean signaling.
It is something that we could take a look at, get feedback from the city engineer, if you're thinking adding conditions for the city council to consider.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's something the applicants have thought about too.
Okay, thank you.
Please go ahead.
I have a question just to help my understanding. What is the timeline for phase 1 and phase 2?
I'm not sure that they have a timeline for phase 2. This is more of a question for the applicant, but well, maybe I won't try to answer that, and we'll let them
Okay.
talk about the timing.
All right. Well, I don't have any further questions either. So seeing none, we can transition to the applicant. So whenever you're ready.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think Nate will handle it, yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Gary. Chair, Commissioners, good evening. Thank you for your time tonight. It's good to see you guys again. Drew Stafford with Orion Investments at 6550 York here in Edina. Us and our team, we're very excited to be here to share with you guys and the update of this project for where we came from since sketch plan. Not sure if any of you guys have driven by the site recently, but like we talked about and Carrie talked about, there's a lot of machinery there and equipment there. Just get you guys some good news and an update on that. We're on track for the 26th for those things to come down. Right now, right in the middle of the environmental remediation, getting rid of some lead and asbestos, taking care of that first, and then we got word from our contractor, our demo contractors, that those things are coming down, starting with the ramp first, and then 7250, and then 7200 from there on. So obviously that's extremely positive news for everyone in the community. So before I hand over to Nate Enger from ESG, our talented architectural team that joined us tonight, I just want to briefly touch on a couple of, I guess, the few core principles that we've been following since essentially this project began. First and foremost, it was important for us to engage with the surrounding community early on in this process to create alignment and get feedback. And we had done that twice now in the last 5 months, beginning before we even submitted anything to city for a sketch plan. We had a community outreach, and you know, it's been overwhelmingly positive, as well as the one in July that we held as well. Secondly, you know, the previously approved project had an emphasis on the connectivity, the pedestrian experiences, and stormwater management. And we feel with our plan, we've prioritized these crucial components, and we've done our best to manage the challenging topography, as Carrie had mentioned, and we'll touch on briefly when we go through our plan a little more specifically. As you guys are aware, the extreme grade changes that are there. Lastly, since our last submittal, we've added a proper north-south pedestrian connector, an abundance of green space, and an effective solution to the stormwater issues that we touched upon in our previous submittal. Most importantly, while adhering to the Edina DEGs and the new sustainability policies that were enacted in April. So that being said, we're proud of where we are with this project, and we think it's you know, extremely beneficial to the community. Myself being a resident here and driving by this every day, I'm very honored to at least have a hand in this and moving this forward, hopefully in a productive way. So that being said, my partner Ted Carlson is also here as well for questions afterwards, and I'm going to hand it over to Nate Enger from ESG to go over some more of the specific details of the project. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Commissioners, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having us. I have here Joanna Griffiths as well, and you can either stay or stand. Or she's a colleague with me at ESG Architecture and Design, also an architect, and very excited to have her along for this presentation. I want to just echo one thing Drew said just recently. We've obviously been in front of you already during sketch plan. We had a discussion about this. What the team has come up with, we are very proud of. You know, obviously in this space, we have to balance a lot of competing visions for this. And I think our team feels very strongly that to the best of our abilities, we've kind of merged all those together, and we look forward to having an ongoing discussion with you about this project. So with that, I think we'll just jump into the presentation here and walk you through what has changed, really, because I think everybody here, with the exception of you, has seen this. So I'll try and be brief on the reiterative stuff and leave plenty of time for questions. So you asked about schedule. So this is kind of the project dates that we've been through. So you can kind of see the prehistory of the project, all the meetings that we've already had. Today, obviously, September 14th, and we're at Planning Commission, and then we would have City Council. In terms of the larger question about schedule, the only thing that we have kind of set in stone right now, because we do have an anchor tenant, is a construction start that is contemplated sometime in March of next year, of 23. So the timeline for this is relatively quick, which should be exciting, I think, to everybody to see something occurring on the site immediately after the buildings are demolished. In terms of phase 2, which is probably a part of that question as well, We can talk about that a little bit more. That's still a little bit up for debate. So as we've talked about previously, this is a mixed-use project. We are now truly meeting the definition of mixed use with the proposal of phase 2 being residential. Previously, when we had come before you for sketch plan, we were looking at 2 office buildings. Now we're looking at an office building and a residential hospitality mixed-use project on phase 2. Because of that, we think this is a really nice addition to this area. You can see all the different types of uses, and it will act as a bridge between the predominantly residential neighborhoods to the west and the predominantly commercial areas to the east. This is the project site. You've probably seen this more times than you'd care to at this point, so I'll just briefly go through that. So we've already talked about who the players are, but one really important thing to highlight here, in addition to, as Director Teague said, meeting the DEGs and the vision for how this project meets the DEGs, is that 94% of all parking on this project will be underground. And that is just a benefit of the aggressive grade that we have on site. As you saw with the previous applicant and the previously approved PUD, it was required to do all the parking underground there as well to balance the hole, basically, that the project sits in. So because of that, we do have some ability to put parking underground here. So that's kind of what it comes down to. The stormwater, Director Teague mentioned that as well. We're proud of the solution that we've come up with here because we can actually develop the stormwater as an amenity for the site. You'll see that later in some of the images, and certainly the fly-through, whereby we're using that as a landscape amenity and something unique to the site. Just due to the phase 1 site alone, the office here, we're projecting 500 plus jobs created for the site. Cleaning up a site that's been kind of an eyesore is pretty obvious. And then I think you'll see as we go through this presentation that we've really endeavored to create a true pedestrian connection through the site through the use of the varied multimodal transportation nodes. So these are just kind of a reiteration of what we understand the Southdale vision to be. And we took these as principles as we were designing or redesigning the site, as it were, because we've departed quite a bit from the previous plan. So what we have today is we have a nominally 124,000 square foot office building. And with that comes a marginal amount of surface parking to basically service visitor parking. The majority of the parking for this site is placed underground in 2 stories of underground parking. That would go from Gallagher on the south and be bound on the north by what we're calling Danila Street, which is actually a pedestrian connection. That is no longer a vehicular access, as is currently the case, which would mean that we would be abandoning the current right in, right out along France. It was our goal to create a more pedestrian-friendly environment here. And because of the inclusion of an office building that has a requirement for a large amount of amenity, Danila will also serve as an outdoor park and amenity space for that use. So by putting the office here, basically we have built-in activation to that particular node. On the north, we have the phase 2 development. And one thing to point out about that, and it's just a minor correction to what Director Teague mentioned, is that our anticipated use of that is actually greenfield, so we would not put surface parking there unless we need it based on tenancy for the office building. So at this time, based on the users that we have lined up, we do not believe we need that parking. But it is essentially proof of parking for us, and that's how we're presenting it, were we to need additional parking. So this time, I can't guarantee you that it's not going to be, but that is not our goal to do that day 1. So just a minor clarification on that. And then we talked a little bit, or Director Teague talked a little bit about this north-south connection. So right now, what that north-south connection is doing for us is it's providing a bike connection through the site, and it's creating access points for the underground parking for both of these projects. If you've been by the site, you can probably even perceive the depth of this site. There's about a 6-foot grade differential between Gallagher and 72nd, and close to an 18-foot grade differential from France down to the current level of the parking. So even by bringing up this north-south drive to a level that essentially is 10 foot below Gallagher to accommodate our P1 level parking access, based on the site constraints, it is not possible along that route to create a pedestrian access that actually adheres to ADA standards. It's just too steep. So instead of trying to force something along that road, what we've done instead, and we have a graphic further on here, maybe I'll just zoom forward just to kind of capture that point. Yeah, so what you can see in this graphic is all purple lines here indicate pedestrian connectivity. So instead of trying to force pedestrians down the car route there, we've routed them around the building and along Edina. We believe that's a better response just from a pedestrian safety standpoint, but also from an activation standpoint. By moving them to the front facade of the building, we're actually getting more eyes on that building, which is part of the reason that we believe that there's a 20-foot requirement and a 70% glazing requirement for glazing on first floors in this district. So by moving all of those uses together, we feel like we're further enhancing that requirement. And you can see how connected the site really is from north to south in this graphic here. It connects all the way up onto France and then all the way along Edina. Do you have any other comments on that one?
So we paid a lot of special attention to how a pedestrian would access this site in general, being especially conscientious of our neighbors to the west, being primarily residential. We know that experience of walking through their neighborhood essentially is a really important one. So keeping pedestrian safety front of mind, while also integrating the fact that this new stormwater basin becomes a public amenity, as does Edina Plaza, which we're going to call it that because it makes a lot more sense since it's pedestrian focused. These connection of green spaces become a community asset and a place that can, act in many different ways as a community benefit for not only for the buildings themselves, but for the neighborhood and the community itself. And maybe we could actually go back and go through some of the previous slides since we put so much time and effort into these beautiful renderings. So just to touch a little bit on the different phasing. So as far as the first phase and the first step that we are hoping to commence shortly, we're looking at making sure that there's planted setbacks and hardscape paths all the way around, really kind of circumnavigating the entire building and allowing you to experience that kind of greenscape and greenfield everywhere throughout the site. And as Nate mentioned, it's likely that we won't need to use that parking on the north side of the site at 7200. So that would remain open until phase 2, when that second building would be designed and built. We can kind of go forward. So phase 2 is to be determined. It would be similar in scale. So as far as what we're looking to provide in the future, approximately 150 units of mixed use. And again, we'd be keeping that parking enclosed and out of view. Sustainable design is definitely at the front of mind as we went through the design of the site and the building. Not only are we going to be meeting all of the newly adopted sustainable guidelines adopted by the City of Edina, but we are really taking it to heart as part of our core values of what will be guiding the design of this and really showcased throughout the site. That previous slide was just showing that we're being conscientious of our neighbors and examining how the shadows are going to impact from our building to the neighbors. As you can see from this slide, there's very minimal impact to the neighboring buildings. And then we're just paying special attention to how people are actually accessing this building. As was mentioned earlier, there is that left-hand turn off of France onto 72nd. We only have one main throughway for traffic going north-south in that new north-south throughway. But one thing that we want to note is that this, with the change of paving, with a tabled intersection where the pedestrian path crosses from Danila over to the Stormwater Basin Green area, that would be a tabled intersection for extra pedestrian safety. Just the nature of that throughway is going to discourage a lot of through traffic and make it more safe and comfortable for pedestrians and bicyclists to coexist with cars. Obviously, taking into account bicyclists is really important. The Gallagher Drive is an extension of the nearby bicycle infrastructure within the city of Edina. A lot of bicyclists are using that to connect to the rest of the paths and access this part of the city. So we've taken that to heart and really made sure that this is a safe and accessible throughway for bicyclists with extra bicycle parking stalls and kind of celebrating it in the design as well, as you can see from that rendering. And we talked pretty extensively about pedestrian connections. I think we kind of touched on room typologies, or Carrie did earlier, so we can go more into that, but be rest assured that we paid very close attention to all of the requirements of those typologies and are meeting the spirit of those to the best of our ability. What this graphic is showing is that overall neighborhood context and how we are connecting to not only the current grid, but the future grid that would be implemented as we kind of follow the Edina DEGs and implementing that 200-foot street grid over the top of this site. So what you'll see is not only the addition of the vehicular north-south street, but also the pedestrian streets as well. We won't read this, but this is available for the community to read. And I think the gist of it is that we have really taken the design experience guidelines to heart. We've examined every element of them and responded to it in a thoughtful and intentional way. And we've really, look forward to getting additional comments and feedback as this process evolves and making sure that this is a really good fit for the city of Edina. And again, lots of writing. Again, this is all available for you to read, and we'd be happy to refer to any of the specific questions that you might have. This goes a little bit more into the metrics that Carrie also referred to earlier. And then the street room typology is just showing how we're meeting the spirit of the typologies. And we did submit a separate document that has the full drawing set, including civil and landscape and electrical. We did a site photometric study to see how the proposed site lighting would be impacting the surrounding community. And we wanted to document all of the feedback that we got from SketchPlan and should show how we responded to those comments. And I think one of the big ones was, really incorporating the multimodal local street in the north-south direction. And I think that we were able to successfully use the challenge of the existing extreme site grade changes and use that to our advantage in creating a really active and yet safe and accessible way of accessing these buildings. Landscape, we've touched on quite a bit, so I think we can kind of move through here. This is showing how ADA paths move throughout the site. Civil, they submitted a 100-page stormwater report, which we won't be reading tonight. But to summarize, this site really collects stormwater from throughout the surrounding neighborhood and the surrounding properties. Historically, it has been problematic in terms of flooding. So what this does is proactively address those kind of inherent issues that have plagued this area in the past, and then turns it into an amenity by turning it into a green space with public paths, lookouts, and areas for gathering.
It's also worth noting that all of what Joanna just identified will be happening in phase one of the project. So We are going to remediate the site to deal with the stormwater, not just from our site, but from the surrounding areas in phase one, also taking into account the potential use of 7200 as well. So we've got a bunch of images here, and then we have a video to share with you as well, but we thought we'd take you for a spin around the architecture here and kind of show you maybe what's changed and how we're meeting the intent of the materiality for the design guidelines. So the form of the building, it takes the form, I guess, of kind of a very classical building with a base, middle, and top, but we're trying to do that in a little bit more modern way. So this building uses the 20-foot kind of podium requirement in the DEGs and addresses that out of a stone material. And so that sets the base, and that's all the way around, and you'll see that in other images. It's a four-story building on top of that, and so you can kind of see this broken up into two halves here. The glassy portion is a window wall system at this point, so that is a pretty modern, sleek-looking design, and then that is contrasted with a brick sort of a treatment with punched windows. There's a pretty strong roof form here too. We felt that its prominence at the corner of Gallagher in France really required a strong gesture here and a statement as the first part of this design. You can also in this image start to get a sense for the slope of that pedestrian, or the vehicular access there. So you can see that biker tailgating that truck right down into the parking area there. So this is a view kind of like a bird's eye from what would be France. You can see Gallagher kind of in the left there. And so on this side, what we've attempted to do is provide the France-facing side with more solid material. And that's for a number of reasons, primarily because a lot of glass facing France can be challenging from an acoustic standpoint for office users. So providing solid material actually helps mitigate all that sound from France. Even though we have a 50-foot setback, that will help with that. It also gives it a formality that we think is important for this area and to provide a statement there. That corner is intentionally all glassy there, and we do have an outdoor balcony up on the 5th floor that would be a tenant-occupied balcony. You can see at the base lots of punched windows, and actually, as we move through the process, I think we will be exploring really opening up this lower corner where you can see that tenant sign to be even more glassy and potentially an operable glass wall there for tenant amenity spaces that would open up onto Danila. So this might be a much more active use. We could have people eating outside, just a much more attractive way to access the outdoors there. So this is the elevation as you come off Gallagher. So again, you can kind of see the formality of the building transferring from the very glassy portion facing the residential areas to the more solid punched window expression along France. You can also see the extent of the landscaping that Joanna kind of mentioned here. There's multiple layers of landscaping that transition from something that really reads at the scale and speed of France to something that is more accommodating of pedestrians with the lower plantings. And then an elevation straight on from France here as well. You can see, or I suppose you can intuit that there is enough glass here to meet the 70% requirement that is set forth, and that is scattered around the podium. We also are developing a porte-cochere here for a drop-off, which will be a feature, and also works into that connection down on Danila. If we have an image of that, you can kind of see that occurring here. So this would be standing on 7200 looking back, and you can see how Danila is kind of working its way down alongside the north side of our 7250 building. And then this is an image taken basically as you land at the bottom of Danila at that confluence of the pedestrian connectivity and the vehicular access as you would potentially move to that water amenity. So that's what we have for images. I think it might be appropriate to share the video now, if that's okay. And Carrie, is that loaded up on this computer, or are you going to plug? Okay. I can probably make a pretty good guess. Yep. Is that it? All right. All right. Did anybody test the sound on this? Okay. So that is kind of concludes the formal portion of our presentation. We have our whole team here, as well as a lot of documents, backup documents, if there's any questions about civil, any of the other things that we mentioned here. So happy to stand for questions from any of the commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great presentation, and I appreciate the video. Who wants to get started with questions? Commissioner Smith?
Yes, great presentation. I think all the renderings really bring life to the sketch and the drawings, and the video, really help give that perspective. So that was really well done. And I think the building is absolutely beautiful. A couple questions just on a few things. The two ones I'll start with for right now is on the community outreach. I know you guys did that prior, and then you did it a second time. If you could just share some more insight on how you guys went about doing that, kind of what was the format, how was the information and feedback collected, and some of the feedback from the residents. I'm guessing it might have been folks from the Cornelia neighborhood, is what I'm guessing. And then the second part is just to elaborate a little bit more on the stormwater component. I was looking at some of the engineering drawings. I think a lot of the water just runs straight from the parking lot into that basin. I'm not sure if it processes any of that chemicals that run off from the vehicles, if that basin is going to be filled with water all the time or dry when there's no rain. Just some sense of what water levels you guys expect to see there. And then you also mentioned that it's pulling water not just from this site, but the surrounding community. Just kind of share some more about that. So just to reiterate, the feedback from the community and some ideas and some feedback on the stormwater management.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Smith. I appreciate that. I'm going to answer those in reverse, if that's okay with you. And I'm going to qualify this by saying I am not a civil engineer, but I can provide you with my understanding of what the civil engineering is for this, and then we can certainly provide backup for that in the form of documentation. So to your first point, yes, this project does take stormwater from the surrounding areas, and I was looking for that. Do we have that graphic that shows? Yeah, I'm having a problem with the mouse here. But we do have a graphic that shows the different areas that we're pulling from. Suffice it to say, it's basically the surrounding residential areas as well as ours. The way that the stormwater is working for that site is currently, it's so low. What happens now is that whole area, including that parking lot, is a flood zone. So it's meant to overflow. That's how it deals with it now. So in our proposal, the way that this is being dealt with is the existing stormwater infrastructure, i.e. the pond, is being enlarged, and I believe it's being deepened. And then they're going back in and changing the soil composition. What's that? No, it's okay. Changing the soil composition, the drainage infrastructure to allow for more infiltration. Great. Thank you, Ted. So I apologize. I'm going to step back, but you can see here in this graphic, all the areas highlighted here are being addressed by this new stormwater infrastructure. So 7300 Gallagher and what's identified as the residential area there are all draining into this area. So it's basically a regional ponding area as well as ours.
Yeah, good evening. Ted Carlson with Orion Investments at 6550 York Avenue. So just to tack onto that, the stormwater pond, if you will not always be full, Commissioner Smith. It's meant to be full after significant rain events and or spring thaw, but it's designed to be an amenity when it's not full. So, our civil report, I think Joanna mentioned, is 100. I think it's actually 104 pages long of how do we solve stormwater for this site and the surrounding sites.
Thank you, Ted. It's also worth noting, in the condition where it is not full, it will actually be planted with native plantings. So you've probably seen this elsewhere, but basically what we're talking about is native planting to Minnesota that will be, when dry, kind of a landscaped area full of all sorts of different species of plants that are tolerant of being under submerged for a time and then exposed to a dry condition. So
I think, Nate, too, is that the Watershed District has provided input on these plans.
That's correct. In terms of rate and flow, there are requirements for the Watershed District that we have to meet for this, and I think that's all collected within that report if you're looking for some light bedtime reading.
Or the cure for insomnia, possibly.
Yes, correct. So does that sufficiently answer your questions on the stormwater, Commissioner Smith?
Environmental remediation. Is stormwater just like, if my car is dripping oil, rain falls, it brings all that into that basin. Does it go through any kind of like gravel filtration, anything like that, or it just kind of rolls into that pond? Essentially, like after a big storm event, would it just be like that rainbow-looking oily water floating, or would it be a little bit cleaner, essentially?
It's a great question. I would say that 90% of all surface lots or any sort of drainage in any development do not have any sort of filtration like that. What you're talking about is some sort of gas trap. So oftentimes in submerged parking lots, you will see that because there's no other place for that to go. Don't believe we have anything like that proposed as part of this, but as I think you'll see in the report, there is filtration medium within the stormwater basin itself that will try and pull out some of that sediment. But that being said, there is nothing specific that we're doing to treat like oil or runoff from cars.
Yeah, 94% of our parking is underground or hidden, which means that all of the water, if you will, collected off those cars that are underground needs to be treated in catch basins and what's the right word? Waste traps before it then gets submitted downstream.
Yeah, that's a good point. So from that standpoint, this proposal is a betterment from the current condition because as it stands, all of that surface parking, or what was surface parking, nobody's parking there now, but previously, all that's just running off and just draining into the soil. So what Ted's talking about is, as a requirement by code, in our structured parking underground, we do have to have flammable waste traps. So any other questions in that regard, Commissioner Smith?
I think this is really helpful. I'll definitely have some more, but I know you're capturing, Gallagher water as well, residential water, because you're expanding the collection. So it's not just your site,
Correct.
but it's everybody else's site in that region. But I understand, how it's not going to be full all the time. It's going to be dry.
Yes.
For some part of the year. Springtime on the thaw and like big water events, you're going to get that filling up. Yeah, the only concern was just that, sometimes you see like that oily film on the stone, on the rock, and then, that's not too great. But if this is something that's, most cities or most sites do, then it's not atypical, right, for you guys to
That is correct. What we're proposing is not atypical. In fact, I would call it typical, the way that we're dealing with this. We can certainly follow up with more detail from our civil engineer if that's helpful to you.
Okay.
Regarding the public feedback, which was your first question, we have met with the Cornelia neighborhood twice. Both of those meetings were conducted via a Zoom sort of format. We sent out invites to everybody within a 1,000-foot radius of the site, and we got very good attendance on both calls. I think we had upwards of about 20 people being engaged. So as it goes for community input, that was fairly large, which is great. Or 50. At some point, you stop keeping track. But what's really great, maybe the only great thing about COVID, was that when we moved to that Zoom platform for these meetings, it allowed us to capture all those comments because everybody would type them in instead of just kind of bleeding them over. So we're able to respond to every single one of those comments as they're written. And I think in our estimation, somewhere upwards of 80, maybe even 90% of the comments were very, very positive. People were very excited to have this site being taken care of. We had previously shown you a graphic of how this development is not marginally different than what was currently or previously proposed. I think a lot of people appreciated understanding that for context. Some of the other questions we got were certainly about traffic. You are not alone in that concern. But certainly with the traffic report that we have now indicating that this is, in fact, reducing the traffic demand, I think it makes a lot of people feel more comfortable. Additionally, the removal of the right-in, right-out further reduces the traffic load of cut-through traffic, which is a hot topic in that neighborhood. And then, as Joanna mentioned, the tabling of the intersection on that the vehicular connection, as well as increasing the medians for that, will slow down traffic significantly. So through our conversations specifically related to traffic, which was a reoccurring theme, I think many of those concerns were assuaged. Aside from that, it was surprising and novel in the course of my career to hear people actually appreciating the architecture and what we were doing. So that was fairly nice. It seemed like most people really appreciated having a lot of glass facing them versus a lot of like punched windows and so forth. So,
Thank you.
you're very welcome.
Other questions? Commissioner Alkire.
Just a quick one kind of touching on the infiltration basin. What is the elevation of groundwater in this area? Because,
Wow.
I mean, at least what's listed at the bottom of the basin's 831.
That's a great question, Commissioner Bennett. I think we may have that. And certainly, if I can't find it in the next 30 seconds, we can certainly follow up. We might have to, can we use a lifeline?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
You know, I just looking through the area, you know, relying on what's publicly available, at least on the east side of where Centennial Lakes is, which is natural, but not really. It's above the bottom of the elevation here, and then Lake Cornelia is quite a bit above that. So if it is going to sit dry or not, I think, you know, most people would picture this would be a much more pleasant amenity with water exposed.
Yeah, correct.
So
Yeah.
it'd be, I don't know, it'd be an easier sell if that was showing most of the time versus dry. So.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, we would love to have a pond on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But we don't want to set a false expectation. Looking through this report, again, excuse me, it's 108 pages, not 104. But I think one of the key takeaways for us is, you know, the development and professional team is this has been through the ringer with the 9 Mile Creek
Yeah.
Watershed District, and they've said, hey, good job. So at the risk of looking flippant, which I'm not, that's a real high bar for us to hurdle.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I appreciate the question because certainly one of the high points of that video is seeing that kind of that water basin and what an attractive amenity that can be. I think from a landscape perspective, that can be a beautiful space even when it's not full. So that is what our team is endeavoring to do, is to make sure as the seasons change, as these conditions change, that it remains attractive. What we don't want to do is provide something that's going to look like a swampy mess.
I found it on page 6.
Nice.
The existing groundwater elevation is 818.80. Our finished floor elevation is 856, and the ground floor elevation of our second story underground parking is 836. We have a 17.2 foot separation between the low floor of the parking and the existing groundwater elevation. So I think, to your point, when it's not a pond, it might be a heck of a sledding hill.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting how much it changes, compared to what's available and exposed nearby,
Yeah.
relatively speaking, so.
Well, and to tack onto that too,
Yeah.
as we engage the neighborhood and we, paid attention to the previous applicant, is it creates a heck of a nice buffer between our project and the neighborhood and the townhomes and the homes further west. And the preservation of the trees along the west also is a really nice thing for us. So frankly, it's an acre and 3/4 of buffer between the housing and our project.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I just, I built a rain garden, and this is essentially what it would be, where it's just flooding and ponding in events versus, that's what you see on the regular. So, I don't say it's misrepresenting, but to me, if it were, exposed water most of the time, it's just a nicer amenity. So
Agreed.
That's why I had the question, because regarding what's nearby, and I didn't see that in the plan, so I just wanted to know for your benefit too, if water was going to be there more often than not, that'd be a good thing. But if you're treating it and you got granular soils, you're going to want to get it out of there as quick as possible. So, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner Bennett? Maybe later. Commissioner Alkire?
Thanks for the presentation. It was really very well done. Two questions. First on phasing and second on the north-south navigation. So on the phasing, can you just say a few words about why we're going about it in this way, approving phase 1 and then approving phase 2 at a future date? And then kind of related to that, if you do find you need surface parking at 7200, what are you going to do about that parking requirement as 7200 is being built in phase 2?
Yeah, great question. So thank you. So, we don't take this lightly that, we want to get a great building constructed on this corner. And it's a public record is what we paid for the site in October of last year. So we believe in, our community and we believe in this site. So, we're looking to build plus or minus an $80 million project on this corner. And that's a heck of an investment in our community. And I think that's a plenty big bite right now, frankly, for what we've got that can align with market demands and trends within corporate office space. And so, we're very comfortable that this is a project that would have very strong leasing success and interest at this point. What we don't want to do is make a misrepresentation on what phase 2 could potentially be, because this site is almost 6 acres in totality. And so, we want to provide all the public infrastructure day one, the connectivity, the pedestrian walkways, the stormwater, the setbacks on France, so on and so forth. And a key tenet of the DEGs is to have mixed-use development. And mixed-use development creates complementary uses and ultimately reduces demand on cars, vehicles, parking, so on and so forth. So we've spent an incredible amount of time having spirited conversations with staff about what does a potential phase 2 look like. And that's where a potential phase 2, based upon the parking and traffic study, does not include an office component. Because phase 2 has the opportunity to support parking if needed on phase 1. Drew and I are at the cutting edge of office development. And we own an office building where we office now at 6550 York. And we're 90+% occupied. And we see the traffic that comes in and out of that building on a daily basis. You're probably also aware we're also working on another project, 2 blocks from this. And so as we think about the trends and what people do and how they work and the return to office, and we had this with a large corporate user today that we met with, is it's shifts. And it's a group here 3 days a week and a group here 1 day a week. And so what we're trying to be is really forward thinking about how space is used, about how office occupants come to the office, and about how they get there. Secondly, is this is part of the new bus line. Is it the rapid?
BRT.
I'm sorry.
It's a BRT, Bus Rapid Transit?
Yeah, Bus Rapid Transit line. And so we think that's a huge connector that I believe opens in 2024. So taking this back to the timing of when this project starts, if we have success with approvals, Nate and his team need 6+ months to do all the design drawings and all the engineering. We'll put a shovel in the ground April 1st of 2023. It's an 18-month process to complete what we call core and shell, which is the landlord delivery, which puts us at October of 24. And then our office tenants usually take 6 months to build out, which means occupancy in spring of 25 at plus or minus, okay? And so we've seen a lot of trends change in the way people use office over the last 3 years. And we believe those trends are going to continue to change. So that's why we don't want to over-construct parking today, but we'd like to have the flexibility in the future. I can assure you that from a finance perspective, that holding 7,200 in a temporary parking solution is not good for us. It's simply a belt and or suspenders, if you will, and then the future phase 2 would need to provide parking for that phase 1. Lastly, as you look at the aerial, and you can somewhat see it here, there's a lot of surface parking adjacent to this. And if we're thinking about occupancy in spring of 2025, we're going to understand exactly what our tenant mix and demographic looks like. And Mark Peterson, who owns the Cedars to the west, the office condos to the south, the pinstripe ramp to the east, the surface parking at Macy's, just on this aerial taking during the day, there's a plethora of unused parking. So it's in our best interest to make sure that we can service our tenants who may use the building should we need it beyond this site. And we'd like to think, based upon our experience and track record in the city of doing what we say we're going to do, if and when we would need to provide more, we'd figure it out.
Thank you.
There was a second part to your question that I want to make sure I address, which was what happens in that transition zone between phase 1 being completed and phase 2 starting, because there is potential for an overlap of on the order of 25, 30 cars that potentially, if we needed them on the phase 2 lot, would be removed during the construction of the phase 2. And I think Ted has just kind of summarized part of that solution, which is that there's abundance of surface lots over there, and it would be incumbent then on the landlord, or Ted and Drew, to basically find a temporary solution for the 18 months of construction, because we do have, as Director Teague had mentioned, ample parking once the whole process is completed to support both this office and a proposed mixed-use residential hospitality building.
Got it. Thank you. It's okay. That's okay. Thank you very much. And then the second part of the question was north-south navigation. So if I understood your presentation correctly, ADA pedestrian traffic from Gallagher to 72nd would go around to the front of the France, go around to France and around the building that way?
That is one option. However, the primary mode of ADA transportation is actually going to be along the face of the building here. So if you look at this graphic, these purple lines indicate all ADA paths available through the site.
Okay.
So we have an ADA sidewalk basically elevated above that north-south connector. Within 5 feet of it, however, not down in the kind of valley that drive is, so providing a safer pedestrian environment, as well as an ample pedestrian thoroughfare right in front of 7250, which we believe creates more engagement with the building.
And it's frankly very intentional.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay, so there's an easy pedestrian path to the west side of phase 1 and phase 2.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, and furthermore, we talked about the connectivity north and south. So this road aligns with the property boundaries beyond Sunrise to the north and with the properties to the south, so that it would bisect the properties moving north and south. So it's very thoughtful in the manner it's laid out to maintain that grid structure. But then furthermore, if you go back to this slide, is not only that, Danila Plaza, which shout out to my daughter and or goddaughter if you're still watching, is named after them, could also connect to the west. It could very easily transition through this area into the neighborhood to the west.
Okay, thanks. And what do you anticipate the design speed for the bike and car north-south transportation?
Terry or Director Teague, do you know that?
That I don't know.
Is the question the design
Speed. Yeah, what are you going to design the road to? How fast are cars going to comfortably go through there? 5 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour? It's going to, I mean, it has bearing on how comfortable it is to be on your bike in that place, because it doesn't look like in the drawings that there's a bike lane. Looks like there's sharing space, which is fine, as long as it's managed properly.
I think our expectation is it would be at low speeds.
Okay.
I guess we didn't put much thought to that, other than it's designed to serve the site.
The intentionality behind this is to meet the expectation that we are slowing traffic down. So I think were this to be approved and were we to move forward with this, we do have some work to do as we move towards site plan approval, which would be the next step of this, to understand how wide does this really need to be? Is there a dedicated bike lane or is there not? And what sort of traffic calming measures actually go into place? So we're still a little bit early on in the definition of that, but it is truly our intention to slow the traffic down through there.
Okay, because I feel like somewhere in the deck it said there would be a separate bike lane, but then the pictures show not a separate bike lane. So that's something that we'll want to learn more about as the process goes through. Thanks very much.
Fair enough, yes. Thank you.
Commissioner Padilla.
Just a couple of very quick questions. Did you get any input from Sunrise in terms of this development? Were they amongst those that you included in your meeting?
We included, and I believe we reached out, but didn't connect with them, is that correct? But I believe they may have reached out to staff.
I have not heard from residents of Sunrise, but they would have been included in that 1,000. Correct.
Okay. And then it's my understanding that the demolition and the remediation will go on based upon the equipment that was there as of today, I think, or regardless of what goes on currently, that's going to move forward. Is that
Yes,
correct?
we are locked. We are remediating the buildings right now. 7,200 is laced with asbestos. That remediation will likely take through early October, but the demolition of 7,250 should start the week of September 26th. And those contracts are signed.
Thanks.
And if you visited the site, you saw all the equipment there. Okay.
So I have a quick question. Where there's parking ramps, right? And where is the entrance to those?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I'll let my assistant here navigate to the drawings. And I apologize, Commissioner, if this wasn't clear in my presentation. What we're doing is we're utilizing the existing grades. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we have about an 18-foot drop from France to basically the north-south road connector. So we're actually coming up about 8 feet, and you can see in that image that is one of the driveway doors there. So we're using that grade to allow ourselves to drop down nominally 11 feet, which is about what we need to enter on the P1 level of a ramp, and then you would circulate within that ramp to get down to a P2. So yeah, that's a good elevation too, Ted. Yeah, I wish we could zoom in, but theater of the mind, I guess, here. There might be a rendering too. Is that clear, or could I?
Yeah, I think that this is helpful. I think for me, where I'm struggling is it feels like so much of the pedestrian experience is impacted by that adjustment in grade with the north-south connector.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you thought about other ways to still enter into the parking ramp while also making it a pedestrian-first experience rather than designing around the vehicle.
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, our first intuition, I think, as it would be with most people, when you look at the site and you see it, is if you fill in this whole thing and you just connect a Gallagher to 72nd, it's only 6 feet after all. Could you just put a whole structured entity across that and then layer on top of that whatever you need? And what we found through our explorations, multiple explorations in fact, is that the amount of structure and backfill that is required because of the extreme grade, remember we're talking 18 feet of grade differential from France down to its current location. So we would basically have to restructure all of that, and then we would have to structure all of that to support driving traffic as well. So basically we're building a whole underground building all the way out to what would be the westbound of our site. And we did look at that, and what it was determined is that financially is not viable, and that's what you found through the last proposal, is that that's what they had presented. That's why they had underground storage, and that's why ultimately the deal did not go forward. So ultimately, we found out the hard way, I think, through those explorations, that that is the crux under which this project rotates.
Yeah, and to take it a step further, part of the sustainability, which we've been very engaged with Grace and staff, is to use this topography to our advantage while hiding the cars. So is it a perfect solution? No, but I think one of our core tenets that we held from the previous submission was adhering to the connectivity and the pedestrian experience. But we still need to move vehicles through the site. So it'd be much easier for us if we didn't need to provide the connectivity. But that's a core tenet of the DG, so I think that's what we want to do here, and we've done it absolutely to the best of our ability.
Thank you. Any other, Commissioner Miranda?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess to continue Commissioner Elkeyer's and the chair's questions about moving through the project. So on the last, and maybe you covered this and I missed it, but the last page of the staff report has staff comments on transportation elements. And is that something that's going to be incorporated in the project, or are those ideas that were just thrown out, or?
Transportation elements.
Yeah. We have been in constant contact with Director Miller and Director Teague, and I believe we have a call set on Friday to address those concerns. The specific, I think it's the last page of the staff report. And I think one of the, just as an example, and this is probably way in the weeds, but there was encouraging the narrowing of the north-south street to discourage through traffic, and we said, that'd be great, frankly, but then we're deviating from the street typology. So I think that's part of the technical conversation that we'll still have with Director Miller.
Okay.
But if I may, most of these comments, I think you're referring to the sheet, are just fine. We just really want to understand, okay, what's the comment and what's the full intent.
Okay, thank you. And then, okay, so your diagrams and images show the pedestrian walkways and tables and whatnot on the front of the building, on the France Avenue side of the building. So are the front doors projected to be on France Avenue, or are any doors going to be on France Avenue, or?
At this time, we do not intend any doors to be on France Avenue other than access doors for basically people going out and utilizing landscaping there. But we would not have entries along there.
Okay. Okay. And then you said you wanted, when you were describing the materials, you talked about the France side of the building having more brick than the back side of the building. And you said, if I understand that correctly, that was to mitigate noise from cars on France Avenue?
That's part of the rationale,
Right.
Yes, correct.
Right, okay. So, I mean, your diagrams show these walkways and, right there, walkways and people using France Avenue and having tables and chairs and whatnot out there. And yet people inside the building are going to be upset by the noise on France Avenue. So it seems sort of, I don't know, odd that you would have that sort of thing. I do seriously think, that the noise between the cars on one side and the building on the other side, there's going to be a lot of noise on France Avenue. All right, so then the bikeway. Okay, so the bikeway with Sharrows I had issues with, but I see the city addressed that, staff addressed that. Are there any bikeways planned on France Avenue, or no? No? Okay.
Not at this time.
And then, so if a cyclist is coming in on the north-south street, because you showed the bike parking to be on the Danila Street, if I understand that correctly. So if a cyclist comes in on the north-south street, what's the pathway they get to that parking?
Coming off of 72nd. Is that what you're asking? Or are you
Or
saying off
Gallagher,
of
yeah,
Gallagher?
Gallagher,
Either way.
either way.
The intention, again, and I think thank you for bringing this up because we clearly have a little bit more work to do with engineering. What you can see in there is that they're asking for an additional widening of that street to provide a dedicated bike lane. So as part of that conversation, I imagine we'll get to an actual solution for what you're looking at. That would be our intention, is to provide a safe infrastructure for bikes.
Okay. Well, the question I'm getting to, if I understood correctly, the bike parking would be on the south side of Danila Street?
Yes.
For
so
this building, yes, correct.
So you're either going up 20 steps with a bike, or you're going that, ADA compatible path on the north side to get to the bike parking.
So Danila does have a pathway that you could ride your bike up.
Right. Yeah, it's quite convoluted. Okay. All right. And then the publicly accessible park, is that public property or is that private property?
Are you speaking specifically of the Danila Plaza
The
component?
stormwater basin.
That would be public.
Yeah, I believe one of the conditions is to provide public easements, correct?
Correct. There would be public easements over both the east-west and north-south connections.
Okay. And the stormwater basin?
I would love the city to own and operate the stormwater basin.
No.
No, okay.
Excuse me, we.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
Great. One thing that I didn't really catch is just service vehicles, just to kind of play off of, Commissioner Agnew's questions on just access. But if you have like garbage trucks, recycling, like where would they go to collect from the buildings and even like supply the buildings with stuff? Like where does that happen?
Commissioner Smith, great question. And this is going to highlight one of the big departures since the previous time that you saw this in sketch plan. If you recall, we were still looking at this as a medical office building. And medical office buildings, conversely to regular office buildings, generate large amount of trash more than a traditional office building. So typically in an office building, what we're looking at is recycling, not as much trash, but these are still important components. The trash and recycling could be handled through the front. It could be handled underground. We still have to work, through the parking ramp. So we still have to work through all those turning radii. In terms of deliveries, very, very small amount of deliveries actually go to an office building. So we're talking about UPS things. The biggest moment of any delivery you're ever going to have is when a tenant moves in, and that's kind of a 3-day window with kind of a 50-foot straight truck. So we would imagine all deliveries to come in through the front door, UPS, probably very similar to how you do it here.
Just to add a couple more. On the 7200 site, so phase 2, just a couple questions on that. Let's assume that you don't need extra parking and it's going to be, you don't have to develop parking on that site. Is it just going to be grassy, like with sod, that could be activated by residents? They could use it, do yoga, exercise in the park or in that section while it's, prior to development? Or how do you guys kind of envision that space, prior to being developed?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. In the past, when we've had sites that become, for lack of a better term, pad ready, which is what we're hoping for in this site, there's a condition that's required through city ordinance code. I may be using the wrong nomenclature, but that requires it to be in a presentable position, which in our case is seeded grass and somewhat maintained.
And could the public use it, or is it really just private space that is just, it's just a green space that's there?
I think it's designed to be green space. I mean, it's privately owned, not publicly owned. So the insurance person sitting to my shoulder saying, "Better watch it here." But We don't really care if people are on the site, frankly. They're going to be on our, using our public roads and sidewalks anyway, so.
Gotcha. And Plan B, I don't know if you talked about timing. If you could just share a bit more about when you think you will start developing. And I think you also mentioned that, you know, the last time we weren't super excited about a grocery store, but I know you guys have different plans for that space. So just tell me the type of tenants that you think would go here and when would that happen?
Well, this is the fun part. So I'm reading our notes from sketch plan, trouble with the grocer. I also have comfortable and uncomfortable with the grocer. So I think that was enough for us to say, okay, no grocer, gotcha. We have, again, a significant amount of money invested in this site. So from a development perspective, the fuse is ticking on our money. And so we need to monetize it. But all that financial stuff aside, what really matters is that we've got an opportunity to do something that's mixed use, DEG aligned on this site. And for a long time, there's been a very reputable spa and lodging brand that's been looking for a home in Edina. There's multiple hard goods retailer looking for homes in Edina. Edina continues to remain a very strong market for multifamily. Edina is a very strong market for hospitality. The Westin occupancy rates are the highest in the Twin Cities. So I think as we work through this with staff and adjusted the parking and traffic report, we wanted to make sure that whatever use was proposed here was constrained by unit counts, occupancy loads, traffic, parking, et cetera. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but those are kind of the list of uses that we think about coming together on phase 2, the 7200 site.
Sorry. So, got it. So not a grocery store, but you'll start marketing, sharing that, trying to find a good tenant. And once that's secured to some degree, that's when you'll start the construction phase of phase 2.
Yeah, 100%. And frankly, too, on an $80 million project, this is requiring $25 million in equity to bring this to life. So part of it is let's bite the part of the apple that we can today that we know the market will support and we're excited about, while maintaining some great flexibility in the future to provide that complementary use. So we would love nothing more than to, as we get this hopefully approved, and if we've got success, and Nate and team are drawing and we'll shovels in the ground April, as soon as we move through hopefully an approval phase, then the marketing will pick up on phase 2.
One thing that I can add to that, just from a logistics standpoint, is that just conceptually, it's in the development team's best interest to get this going as fast as possible, because if they can develop 7200 to the extent that they can not have to mobilize construction twice, that's a huge cost burden. So as you're thinking about this, you're probably thinking about the same things this team is too. The sooner they can get that, if they can use the same construction team, they'll actually end up saving themselves money. So from a lot of perspectives, it's in their best interest to move something forward relatively quickly.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the front door. Is the front door in the back?
What's the back?
What's the front?
Well, this is a great question, and I think over the course of the 3 years that we've been working with you on very different projects, we've talked a lot about, what is France doing, and that was kind of your question, or maybe implied a little bit, and where are front doors? So currently, as proposed, the front of our building, as defined by the front door, is actually facing the residential. And that's because that's where all the activation is occurring. Not because we wouldn't want activation along France, but because quite literally in the state it is right now, no one is walking along France because of the conditions that Commissioner Miranda just talked about. That between a building and a 7-lane highway, that's just not a hospitable environment. But along what you are terming the back is protected from that sound, and so it's a much more calming sort of area for us to have our front door. So it is a little bit backwards. We understand that.
Well, I maybe disagree with the word backwards, frankly, but if we look at a project 2 blocks to the north where, we've got a north-south connector, internal street, that's the front doors, and I think that's the same thing here, where we would hope that our front doors are internal-facing instead of outward-facing.
Which building would that be that you're referring to?
The U.S. Bank site, 7001 France.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Director Teague, I have a question for you. Has the city or any developers that we've worked with previously considered doing like a pedestrian skyway across France for ease of use?
Yes, we did have a sketch plan. Commissioner Bennett, I'm sensing, remembers that one. But yes, there was a pedestrian bridge. Might have even been this site. I don't recall exactly what the site was, but yes, it's been considered in the past. I think it was.
May I? There was a project that explored a pedestrian bridge. I believe it was the first part of entitlements for the previously approved PUD, and it was back in 2017 or 18. However, there are monies left over from the Centennial Lakes development, of which Director Neuendorf, is that the right title, is working with the city and a group of real estate owners to figure out how to better the France corridor. Rest assured that we would love nothing more than to have a better connection across France, frankly, and to the promenade to the east of this site. But we would be wildly supportive, but would ask city and or staff to lead that initiative with the county, because France is a county road. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does. And I'm just, thinking through, the possibility of turning the one site into a surface parking lot and comparing the costs to that, and thinking through, potentially, I will talk to maybe Commissioner Bennett afterwards to understand more of the background on a sky bridge, I'll call it. But thinking it would just be more efficient and a better use to not build an 80-stall surface parking to use for 18 months when there is all of this parking right across the street that you could potentially work with to leverage. And so I'm just thinking of creative ideas for you.
1,000,000% aligned with you on that. The last thing we would want to do is build temporary parking and then rip it up. That's why, just at the risk of stating the obvious, we don't want to do that unless it's absolutely necessary and it's a temporary condition, because it's a wasteful.
All right. Other questions? Commissioner Bennett?
There's a lot. I'll start with a couple comments. There's a lot I like about this rendition compared to the previous one. But my biggest hesitation and potential deal breaker is the stuff mentioned about the pedestrian connection and this north-south roadway. And I just feel like there's a better solution out there, and I'm not seeing it optimized here. And it goes to all the diagrams of how a pedestrian would go north to south, and thinking forward, this is our opportunity to create that corridor as a promenade. And so having the parking ramp specifically accessible along, the bottom of this roadway really stifles what the future of that promenade could be. And so that's really where, I like a lot of this stuff, and I'm willing to, look past some of the flaws or whatever. But to me, the location of that entrance is what's just breaking the deal for me. I feel like there's a way that it could be accessible off of Gallagher in some way to get below, so that you could shift elements of that roadway and that parking situation even temporarily, so you're not having to go down so deep to get into that. Because if you look forward and this becomes a promenade, well, people are going to walk there, but it's still going to be an accessible, drivable path. Just doesn't compute. So that's just the main thing, and I'm sure you guys have looked through things, but that's I'm picturing solutions, and I know you guys have gone through probably a bunch of different scenarios, but based off of what I just said, are there other ways that you've laid out the parking and that roadway so that the entrance of that parking ramp doesn't have to be down there?
It's a great question, and I'm glad that you asked it. Actually, in preparation for this meeting, we looked at our folders. We have 22 different options for exploring the different parking.
All right, let's go through.
And so I guess that's what I'm saying is, if people, we're trying to explain that we've kind of evaluated all these different options, and it's not just from a design standpoint, because if it was from a design standpoint, you would have built what was in the previous option, because that's a really good solution. That's probably the right solution if money were no object. Basically putting a super plate on the top. That is what Mick Johnson was suggesting in his report as well. Unfortunately, the fatal flaw of that is that the cost to build that infrastructure is so burdensome on such a small site that it'll never get built through a development. So, but if there's other options that you have in mind that we potentially haven't explored, I mean, it would be very helpful to hear those ideas.
Yeah, maybe I'll share some in my comments. But that is, to me, that is the thing that is driving, it's really that specific location of where that ramp is and what that does to the design of going down and creating these.
Well,
yeah.
I think what's missing from the narrative here is the sustainability policy, which is implemented in April, and trying to bring a LEED certification to the site, which looks at current use, disposing of materials, vehicular visits. I'm at the risk of sounding like an expert, which I'm not, but all kinds of different things. And frankly, when you've been to the site, you stand there and you look at the topography and then managing the storm water, I would say it's almost physically impossible to do anything different than what we've proposed here tonight. If money was no object, we can do something different. Unfortunately, we live in a world that's constrained by tenants, lenders, debt and equity sources. And we need to build a project that we can also maintain for, hopefully lifetimes. So is the solution perfect? No, but we don't live in a world of perfect. We live in a world of very good. And one of the things we talk about is on our development team is that, what you're seeing before you tonight is 12 months of ideas and iterations and hundreds of thousands of dollars in spend with third-party experts. Confluence, MBJ on building sustainable design, laying out the materials of the building in a grid that's really efficient, right? Talking about the mechanical systems, talking about not moving dirt twice, talking about using the topography to our advantage. And so at the risk of waxing on and on with the long soliloquy about why not, I would love that, sometimes we feel like, hey, we're showing this commission and or council later a project that we consider to be fully baked, but you don't have the luxury of being involved in meeting after meeting after meeting, iteration after iteration after iteration. So it's easy for us to stand here and tell you, hey, this is a really great solution, we're excited about it, but we believe that. And we've evaluated all those things, and we've got a track record, and we can probably anticipate most of the questions. So we come here tonight prepared with what we think is a great solution, where 94% of our parking is buried in underground, and day one, we're delivering all the public benefit and infrastructure. So if you can think past, hey, maybe it's not perfect, but because of the slope and wheelchairs and ADA, which were constrained by federal law on how we can move people through the site, maybe you'll say, hey, great, I get it, they're doing their absolute best, and we'd like to support this investment in our community.
Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, so I'm not an engineer, but so this plate that's too expensive, is that moving cars, bikes, and pedestrians along that route?
That's correct. And when we do that, if we were to eliminate what you see right here, you actually need fire department access. So what we have to design for is over-the-road loads for fire department fire trucks. So that's where the expense comes in, is anytime we're doing that, it's not just a road, we're structuring this whole parking ramp to accept that.
So is there the possibility that you separate the bike and pedestrian portion and you have just a bridge or whatever you'd want to call it that would be for bikes and pedestrians and not for cars?
You mean differently than we're doing now, because we are separating the bikes or the pedestrians at least from that drive.
Right, and that's why I was confused about the city suggestion, because they talked, because right now, I mean, assuming the staff comments haven't changed anything yet, right now you're proposing a sharrow on the street, right?
That's correct.
Right.
I mean, and part of the reason we're doing that is because we're trying to the best of our abilities to meet that multimodal transit requirement. But I think we would agree that separating that is probably better for the whole development just from a safety standpoint. I mean, having bikes, even if we have a separate bike lane, I got run over by a car commuting back and forth from Minneapolis. I know what it feels like to be pinched between a bridge and a car. So like, this is very important to me. If we didn't have to do it, we wouldn't. And so if the commission would be open to separating those uses, which we think is more safe, I think we'd be in favor of that.
Yeah, and or, you know, restricting the speed limits on the connector. We don't care if it's 10 miles or 50 miles an hour, great. It's designed to be a road that is really just accessed for users of this site.
Right, but I mean, the point of a connector for bikes and pedestrians is to eventually to make a route through the area, right? So it's
Yes.
safer than France Avenue currently. So,
Yeah, and I think the one thing too is, again, the forward thinking piece is, you know, with the cedars to the west. And I'm going to do something that I'm not a giant fan of all the time. But, you know, the Cedars parking on their very eastern boundary is hardly utilized. And as redevelopment further happens, it'd be very easy to take this pedestrian connection across what's about 65% of our lineal of the site and extend it here. So we could have made that abundantly clear, but one of our core tenets is we don't like to talk about properties that we don't own. But part of the DEGs is talking about future planning and connectivity. So I don't want to make any kind of representation that the Cedars has talked about that. We'll talk about that in the future. I only want to represent that as we think about where development is in 5 or 50 years, it's a very reasonable option.
All right, if we don't have any further questions right now, I will move to the public hearing portion. And then I'm sure we'll invite you back up with more questions that we may have. Let's see. All right, so those wishing to provide public testimony tonight may do so by calling in to 888-504-7949 and enter participant passcode 778177. And then when you are ready, press *1 to speak. Everyone will be allowed up to 3 minutes to speak. Please give your full name and address, and staff member Liz Olson will let anyone who calls in know if they have gone over 3 minutes. Remember, it is not necessary to provide testimony if you've already provided comments via bettertogetheredina.org. And please just call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. And so with that, I will look to our call lines.
I have no one on the phone lines at this point. If you want to go to the audience first or wait a minute because there is a delay in the broadcast, that will give some time for people to call in. My clock shows that it's 8:43, so I'll come back to you at 8:44 or whenever I have a caller, whichever's first.
Is there, I'm so sorry, I didn't see anyone here. Is there anyone in person who would like to provide public testimony tonight? Yes, if you would like to, please. I'm sorry I didn't see you. Please come up to the podium, and the green light will turn on after you give your name and address, and then the yellow light will turn on when you have 30 seconds left, and then when the red light turns on, you're up on time. But
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
You can just start with your name.
Hello, my name is Richard Stein. I live at 7016 Bristol Boulevard. Just kind of kitty corner to the north of this site and been living there for around 30 years, okay? So we've seen the evolution over the years. We, the family, has seen the evolution over the years. I've submitted questions electronically earlier today, as well as participated in 2 neighborhood meetings with questions, which have been answered tonight or before. I do have some questions regarding the servicing of the building, particularly the noise created. Noise created by the building itself, as well as the servicing of the building. I think earlier mentioned trash trucks, okay? If you live in our neighborhood on a certain day of the week, you do know that the trash trucks are significantly noisy. I do know the commercial buildings typically don't always have service during the day. They have service during the night. That's particularly particularly true about the businesses on France Avenue. So I believe this would be motivated to be the same, and so that's a big concern of us. And you brought up trash trucks before tonight, so I presume that's going to be a concern that needs to be addressed by the owners or the operators of the building. And also regarding the noise created by the construction of the building. Having living about a block away from another construction site at this very time, we do know that the construction noise can be significant. So we ask the developers and builders to manage and improve the noise created by construction of the buildings. Okay, we do know that it can be significant. We think it's getting worse at this time. Okay, that's it. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I do not have any callers, so I think it's safe for you to move forward.
All right, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the public hearing has been closed. So now I will open it back up. We'll start with, are there any questions that have come up for anyone since our last round of questions 3 minutes ago? All right, Commissioner Bennett.
Yeah, I guess if you could pull up a plan just that delineates the exact extent of the parking ramp relative to what we're seeing above.
Do you have the actual plan? Oh, at the very in the appendices.
One thing to note is that when we do submit these plans, we're sometimes constrained by size.
Yeah.
So
It got broken up into 4 for us.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Commissioner Bennett, here's what I'm going to do, because this is a little challenging, but if you look at grid A on this plan, you can orient yourself to grid A on here. So basically, the north edge of the building is quite literally the north edge of the parking.
I guess more so the western portion. So from
So
8,
western
I believe
portion.
that is.
So there's B.
Where's that 8?
And here is
Right, it's A8 is the.
8.
So really, it really is that.
Yep. So it's basically the edge of the.
The wall that's descending.
Correct. Yep.
And it comes down all the way to basically is,
H,
you know,
more or less.
as easily as you can excavate down without having to do.
It goes down to grid H.
Yeah. All right. And I guess that's just where maybe I have questions about, you know, we have 2 levels that are stacked there. And how much do you depend on the amount of parking that you can house down there? Because it seems substantial. And is there, and you're like, well, I mean, knowing that things are going to change and that there's going to be something built to the north of this, is there something that you're considering to connect maybe the northeastern part of this structure to whatever happens north? Because Danila Plaza goes downwards in elevation. I'm just asking because my potential solution of trying to mitigate things, for your benefit, but also the communities as we look forward is, narrowing the parking ramp structure to the east to provide more space for a corridor on the western portion.
So if I understand you correctly, Commissioner Bennett, keeping the eastern boundary in the same place, but shrinking the ramp to the west.
West to the east.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing, just I'm saying it the wrong way. So the first part of your question, obviously, is the precursor to being able to answer that, right? So how much do we depend on the parking there? Right now, I believe on just this site alone, we're hovering about a 2 per 1,000 ratio. In the office market, we usually kind of drive to those ratios. Typical office market is like 3.5 to 4 per 1,000. That fluctuates. We're significantly below that just with the parking on the site. So we have 2 stalls for every 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
We're already kind of underparked as it relates to the market. Now,
and as it relates to the updated code.
And as it relates to the updated code, that's correct.
But how do you guys feel about it? Do you feel like you're under? Do you feel like you're good?
We have the benefit right now of working with an anchor tenant who at some point I'm sure we'll be able to divulge who that is. And that's not always a luxury we have. But because we have that now, we're able to talk through those parking requirements with them. And I think at this point they're comfortable with that. So that is a little bit atypical. That's not usually the case.
No, it's not typical. And we're, again, go back in time 3 years. In time 3 years occupied. Our underground parking is designed for what we believe is going to be needed in kind of 2030 and beyond, for lack of a better term. And it's what we see on the office buildings we own. We own, 250,000 feet of office now, and we have another, well, depending on this, up to 400,000 square feet coming. So the parking's a huge drag on a pro forma, and it's not exciting to build. So long answer, short question is that as we've gone through iterations laying this out, this is the minimum parking on site that we're comfortable with to support this building into the future.
So I guess one of my questions is, with respect to the future and the phasing, you have this hole in the ground. It's most sustainable both for cost as well as environmental things to try to use the grades to your advantage. But when you commit to this parking ramp and then that plaza, you're essentially going to be filling up some of that void. But are there plans to bury some sort of connection between the buildings, or, just thinking through to that could allow you to depend on future parking to an extent and, rely on that temporary surface thing in the interim because you have that as an option. But to me, even getting like 15 feet more of a corridor on the western side, shrinking the sidewalk and some of the landscaping up against the building, doing diagonal parking, maybe even having a one-way in that then somehow continues out, and keeping the drive just separated where the parking or the bike and pedestrian could be just something separate that descends down. You could commit to the same type of structure, but that's just where my mind's going, and it's probably stuff you've considered, but we haven't been along for those iterations.
Well, at this point in the process, though, I think it's a really timely question because as we kind of led on with, the biggest transition is we've moved from medical office to office building, and one of the things that's lagging with that discussion is how this front parking works. Yeah. So when you deal with medical office building, you have to have a drop-off and all that stuff. So I actually think what you're talking about is something that we can and probably will continue to explore if it's possible. I don't know, and I'm not making any representations, but in a medical office building, you wouldn't do diagonal parking.
Yeah.
But if this were office, maybe there is a way. It's a dead end. The way this is configured right now, it's dead end. So we got to have some way for people to turn around or back out. So that becomes the challenge. But there may be a way to work with this. It's both the surface lot that we've got to deal with,
as well as the efficiency of the parking below. And that's really where the challenge is. Working with our consultant Walker Parking, who does a lot of parking ramps, we're about as efficient as we can get here. One of the strategies we looked at, since you haven't been on those journeys, I'll just kind of share this, is actually going down another half level below P2. So you see there's a ramp on the left side here.
Yep.
We could potentially get more cars by going down another half level, but that's now more excavation, right?
And you're competing with groundwater, which is going to change.
And you're competing with groundwater.
Add more cost and all that stuff.
Right. So all that's to say, nothing's out of the question at this point because there still are things we have to catch up with from this transition. So we're going to continue to look at it. And I think from Ted and my perspective, there's nothing we wouldn't rather do than widen that. So we will be fighting through the process to get as much width out of that as we can.
So currently, I mean, what's going over that ramp is that drive entrance.
That's correct.
So I mean, it is supporting vehicles to some sort of level. So
right, but the differentiation there is we've got our fire access on the drive lane, and that's really what drives cost. Is like car loads aren't that expensive. Yeah. We can do that with precast, but when you drive a fire truck over things, that's when things start to get kind of obnoxious.
Yeah, and again, back to the efficiency, sustainability piece is the floor plates of the building. Nate has designed all kinds of world-class projects throughout the country for office users. It's kind of starts to guide that, and then the parking for visitor parking up front at surface is necessary. So that's where, from an efficient standpoint, we're trying to make this as functional and as sustainable and efficient as possible, all in one. I think we drove Walker Parking borderline crazy with all of our asks on this.
Yeah, no, this is a good image. I mean, I see there's quite a bit of distance between the front of a car and the building face. And if you're committing to that plaza on the north side of this building, I just feel like you could shrink quite a bit of that space between cars and then even get some more space toward that corridor to just completely keep those uses separate. I mean, even getting rid of that boulevard, it doesn't serve much of a purpose if vehicles are sharing the same pathways of
No, for sure, and I think we connect with Commissioner Miranda on the last page of the staff report. Referring to this?
Yeah.
That, and Commissioner T could, trust but verify this, that we are actively engaged with staff to address these concerns to align the street room typologies with the asks on this sheet.
Yeah, I guess all my questions just come to that entrance of that ramp with how things are configured. So it's like if there were ways to move things to the east, consolidate parking to tap into the temporary stuff, but have a connection to the future buried parking, because certainly you're gonna keep that north side kind of a valley a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
It has to be, right?
Because of the 18 feet, basically, we're navigating. To go back to an earlier comment you had, certainly, I'll call it the underground tube connection between is something that we've certainly explored, and I don't know that that's necessarily off the table, because inherently, as these uses evolve, there will be transitory use between these two. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense not to have the ramps connected. We just have to figure out how to make that work with the grading. So it's certainly something we're thinking about. To your point, I think as I turn this over in my head as you're talking, what I keep coming back to is this plan. While there is room on the surface level, as you pointed out, I think there is actually room to kind of collapse more towards the east there. This is really the constraint for us. And as Ted mentioned, we're really kind of as tight as we possibly can be on parking in this ramp. We've even looked at extending it further north and, we're up against our property line on the north, we're against our property line on the south, easements.
Say, look at that. If you took out the left side of the parking and relied on the temporary, surface lot, had a tube ready to go, And then maybe you only needed one level of subsurface parking in that future development because you then share the two of them. I mean, that's just where my mind's going, you know, saving costs on your end, but allowing for more space in the future is, because to get, again, like your priorities are your tenant and building this thing out right, and then, you know, but from where we're sitting, you know, it's really the community and this greater connection in the future. So that's my priority, and where I see that ramp location, it, just as it exists now, it just seems kind of like a deal breaker to me, you know, honestly.
Sure. And the other thing that we should bring into this conversation is the traffic report, the traffic study, because up until even a week and a half ago, we didn't even meet the requirements of the traffic consultant's request for parking. So we're right at the threshold of what they're requiring. So one of my concerns also is that if we eliminate that first row on the left, like you're talking, that's 2 levels of parking. That's probably 30 stalls. I think that would now put us out of compliance again with the requirement from the city's traffic consultant.
Yeah, and frankly, we wouldn't. Again, this ratio of parking that's underneath the building is between 1.5 and 2 per thousand, and that's our long-term, you know, 25-year horizon on parking need that we need to contain on site.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking of the future phase, and this phase is one. You know, I mean, obviously, if, you know, you could park over there, walk an extra 100 feet underground, I would see that as one. That's just how I'm approaching it.
So just to clarify, the preference would be then to actually have the surface parking developed as part of phase 1 to remove these 30 stalls? So that's what the city would prefer to see?
Well, I'm not speaking for the city. That's what I'd prefer to see.
I'm just trying to clarify, because originally we were talking about the surface parking being kind of not desirable. So
it definitely is not desirable, but we're thinking, like, I'm expecting phase 2 to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if those happen and they're
somewhere
connected,
in
then
between, right?
it feels like you could have quite a bit of parking as one. If they were connected between the two of them, you wouldn't have to rely on a drive with 2 separate entrances. You could be a little more efficient with the design and the sharing of parking. And again, that's just, you know, that's my priority. And I just see that as, you know, it helps prioritize the community side of that space to the west, because I understand what you're up against. It's space and the grade change. So how do you even get another 20 feet is kind of how I see it. Yeah. But I appreciate the feedback and kind of the journey.
Thank you. It's been quite one, so appreciate that.
All right, so let's get into our comments.
Thank you.
Who would like to kick us off? Or follow Jimmy, I suppose. Commissioner Bennett. Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, let's just
Please
go.
do.
So, I mean, most of my comments are positive. You can kind of, I mean, you know, the negative ones from what I just shared, but I do want to go over the positive ones compared to the previous plan. And a lot of it's just the presentation. Like, I really did appreciate the video and kind of like the sizzle reel of what the development would look like and feel like. I think it's important to see things from different angles and that movement. I like that it went to office and more of a mixed use, just in general, compared to the grocer, which there's already options close by. So this seems like a departure from the plan, but a good one. So I like that. You know, a positive component, although it was hard to grapple with last time with like eliminating the row homes, kind of, you know, going back a plan, having that kind of corridor feel, you know, that natural buffering with the retention pond, as well as like the pedestrian path. That is really nice. And just thinking of the residences to the west, this is really a transition to what's east of France. So I think it's important to maintain that, and you guys did a good job with that. I really like the elimination of the street going east and west. I like that courtyard commitment to pedestrians in a gathering space. Sure, most of it will be used for the users of this building, but that's great. Like, I'd rather that be the case than a road going through there. So, like, I really like that. I think the design in general of the office, again, what it looks like, the materials, the glass, maybe minus, activation of use, but it's an office building. I think it looks really nice. I think you've mentioned it before, 94% of parking's below grade. Awesome. The negatives, I hit on them, and it's like, for all these great things, I think some of it is because it's phased and we're having to kind of estimate what the future use could be and kind of give you the benefit of the doubt, which I'm happy doing if, the structure of the future north-south connection is right. And I just think it's wrong, just fundamentally, of committing cars going down to connect under to the ramp. I think there certainly are ways to get down into the ramp from Gallagher that you don't have to descend and then come in. And the design committing cars down that path that could be for pedestrians and cyclists, just, again, it feels like a deal breaker to me. And it sucks, but I want to see one of those 22 other iterations that might be different that I would then support. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett.
Yeah.
Commissioner Alkire.
This is really difficult because I can't help but give you a lot of recognition for listening to our comments on the sketch plan. And I'm not going to bother to repeat everything that Commissioner Bennett said. I can sign on to everything he said. And I would add just a couple of things. I really appreciated the way you focused on the north-south navigation and connecting to existing bike infrastructure. And it really starts to feel more like the 200 by 200 human scale vision that we've had for Southdale. So many really great things about this. I would also sign on to Commissioner Bennett's, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way I perceived what you were saying was that, I came into this meeting very concerned about the surface parking lot on 7200, just because I'm always concerned about surface parking. But I would trade temporary surface parking at 7200 between phase 1 and phase 2 if that helped improve the pedestrian and bike experience north-south. I think that'd be an easy trade. I wouldn't have said that 2 hours ago, but you did a really nice job presenting today. So to me, that's an easy trade now. And I don't know how complicated that is, and I don't know if all of us would agree on what improved pedestrian and bike experience north to south actually means. Whether we all agree entirely on that. For me, it might be as much as, if we had an improved pedestrian experience along the west side of that north-south drive, then you're not interfering with the ramp entrance if it has to stay there. I'm not an architect or a builder, so that's maybe the most ridiculous idea you've ever heard, but I'm open to something as simple as that, if we can legitimately say it improves the bike and pedestrian experience north to south, and creates a little bit more space for bikes, so we're not having bikes and cars in the same place. So the more we can do, the better. I don't know if it's 20 feet or what it is, but there's a amount of geography that can do that. And a temporary trade of surface parking, to me, makes that is just a fantastic investment. So thanks for all your work. I really appreciate the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Alkire. Who wants to go next? Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. Great presentation. I'm learning so much from when you guys present and all your designs. And when I look back at our previous meetings, you guys did a tremendous improvement. So you took the feedback, you incorporated most of the feedback, and I think that building is really looking nice, and it really helps build that vision of what the design experience is trying to get us to. So I really appreciate that. I also like that you guys are seeking out LEED certification. I know I was bringing it up the last time. How could you incorporate some kind of green something into the design? And I think you guys did a fantastic job by going after that and looking at maybe solar roofs or different things like that to just make it a better energy efficient building. The trees, I thought I was looking good. I know we didn't really touch much on the trees, but just the landscaping looked really nice. And you have a combination of deciduous trees and evergreens, right? So you get some of the fall colors coming in. You get some of the pines that would stay green all year. I think just that layout, I always like to see trees around buildings. It makes it feel more comfortable. The fenestration, I think, was interesting too. With the windows, I thought we would not have reached there, but if you consider, as you said, like Danelia Avenue, or what do you call it now? It's not Avenue, it's Plaza, and the entire, around the entire building, you get, I think, 75% or 70 to 75% fenestration, which makes it a really more accessible view. It's not like a box from the street. So I thought that was good. I wish I was a part of the Cornelia meetings, to be honest, just to hear what folks were saying, because they would have a position on, I think the right word is WUNERF, we haven't used that word in a long time, but I think that's what we're trying to say. It's a Dutch word, and I tried to look up WUNERFs, and I think it's a space where you're so comfortable in that road. A car could drive down there, slow speed, maybe 5 miles per hour. You could literally put a chair there, sit down, eat, in the street. Bikes are riding past, but it could also be used for cars. And I think part of the concern that's coming up is that there could be congestion on that road, right? Getting into the parking ramp on the WUNERF, right? So folks are coming in from the north or the south, from Gallagher or from 72. That traffic doesn't make it a WUNERF anymore, right? It makes it like, oh my gosh, I gotta avoid cars, or my kids are, running out in this WUNERF and a car's coming to drop off goods, or something. That makes it tough. And so if there's a way that you could incorporate the entrance into the parking without having too much congestion on that WUNERF, I think you guys would be the pioneer, basically, right? You guys would lead the way for a WUNERF connection from, all the way from 62 going all the way down, that would be huge. And you guys would be the pioneers. You'd be on many awards, I'm sure, in the city. So really good design for the building. So, a lot of kudos there to the architects and the team. I love to see good design. So I think, simplicity is always important. I totally get the financial burden, to dump a bunch of dirt in that space to build a top over it that could take the loads for heavy vehicles is expensive, which then makes it hard for you to find a good buyer because you have to transfer all that cost and everything. I totally get that. But certainly I think there might be some creativity that could be done to make that WUNERF more child-friendly, more walk-friendly, more bike-friendly. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I know Jimmy and team had a few ideas. So I think maybe some tinkering there would be good. And if we could sacrifice the, phase 2 space to have temporary parking or some kind of connection to just create more WUNERF comfort, that would be nice. I love, of course, the idea of connecting France east and west. I know it's outside of you guys, right? But a sky bridge or underground tunnel would have been really cool, because I could come to that building and then run to the shopping center and come back without having to drive my car or dodge traffic. Outside of the scope, but it would be nice to see some ideas. But it's really just that WUNERF, right? How do you make that more comfortable? I think that's kind of where we're getting a little bit concerned there. But everything else, you guys did a phenomenal job of taking that feedback and coming up with something that was, really eye-catching and really nice. So thank you for doing that.
Who wants to go next? Commissioner Padilla.
I appreciate the presentation. Thank you very much. Thanks for all of the hard work that you put into it. I think I'm largely going to echo my fellow commissioners here. I think you did a great job of listening to the city's needs and policies and the additional feedback that you've been given. I also think it's important that we don't overlook the lack of negative feedback, if you will, because we've seen that before in large measure. And many, many years ago, I lived on the cul-de-sac that now is part of the drainage that's going into your pond on Bristol Circle. And I remember part of the community in that neighborhood was coming to planning commission meetings and protesting or having a hard time with all the things that were being built on France and all the suggested projects and things like that. So it is not to be taken lightly, the fact that you haven't heard from all those people that I know on a couple blocks away who are impacted by this. So I take the silence as a very positive. Having said that, I agree that you use the topography to great advantage. It's a very challenging site. I think the fact that there are no streets, that it's all pedestrians, as others have mentioned, is great, and I think that's a big plus. As far as the building goes, I would like to see more glass, I think, on the ground level. You talk about that as a possibility. But again, I will go back to the connection to the park trail. So the park trail comes up Gallagher and is quite heavily used. So I think that a bike path and having an accessible, practical bike path that comes up north up to 72nd is very important. I think it'll get used a lot. Although the park path now is across the street, so we haven't really talked about how you're going to get across the street. But the fact that I think it will generate a lot of bike traffic, and I do think it's imperative that the bike and pedestrians be separated, and then that be addressed, and that it's separate from the vehicular traffic. So those are my concerns. But thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you. Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, thank you for the great improvement over the original proposal. And, I love the north-south multimodal connector because that's something that was in the design experience guidelines. I agree with other commissioners that we do need a separate, bike and pedestrian, separating that from cars, and that a sharrow is not infrastructure. One thing I'd like to point out is if you do create something like that, that I want to make sure we get away from having, a winding path or something that, this is for transportation, not for recreation, so we want something that goes directly north and south and not meanders all over the place. Something I'd just like to point out to my fellow commissioners and probably the city council and staff is kind of something that I asked about and you talked further about, which is that having a 7-lane France Avenue doesn't really provide much of the ability to have a walkable, friendly, even, tables and chairs sort of thing on the France-facing side of these streets. And there are other buildings that have been built along France that are similar in that they have front-facing all around, but they have parking on the backside, and they actually have front doors, and these front doors actually are locked, or they're not used, or they lead to a bathroom or a hallway. They're just not very friendly. So that's something that is beyond this project that, I think the city needs to address. And if you look at the design experience guidelines, I'm looking at like section 9 here of the aspirations for the future of Southdale District. Section 9 is about transportation, and it talks about cars are not the focus. And streets accommodate more than vehicles, and I think the city has done absolutely nothing, certainly in the Southdale area, or along France Avenue, I should say. They've done things in Southdale. And that's really important, and that prevents really, I totally understand that you don't want to have an entrance on France, but it's something the city needs to address. And my final point is, commissioners may or may not have noticed that a lot of times I ask, and when we talk about streets and parks, I ask, are these public or are these private? And so, sure, Director Teague talks about city having an easement to provide access, but the problem is that, the way I see it is that an easement provides access, but it doesn't provide control. And so what the city has been really good when they do things right, like the boulevard through Southdale, what's that called? The promenade, right? That's beautiful. The city did an amazing job there, right? But it's city-owned property, right? And so even if you guys build something, or any developer builds something, the city can't come back later and improve it or do anything to it because it's private property. And so I think it's something that we haven't really addressed, and the design experience guidelines certainly don't address it. But I think it's an important point that private space and public space are two different things, and that easements don't provide everything that I think we need. For all we know, the city could get a grant or something from the IRA or something to build something that's better than what a private developer could, because they have profit motives that the city doesn't have. So anyway, that's enough of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Miranda. So I echo a lot of my fellow commissioners' comments. I think the thing that's missing the most for me is the pedestrian feel. This still feels very much like a single use, right? We talked really primarily around the office space that this is. So it's a single use building that is very parking heavy in the back, or is geared mainly towards the vehicle. And even thinking, and I think Commissioner Miranda, you said this, right? Yes, there are a lot of sidewalks, but it doesn't feel to me like they're meant to ease access and traversing this entire site. And so that, I think, for me, is the biggest sticker. The north-south, right, it's not the Woonerf. It's not what we are envisioning. It really feels like a entrance to parking garages. And I really liked the discussion that Commissioner Bennett was having around trying to figure out, is there a way to just more easily add in maybe an entrance off of Gallagher, and then the entirety of what's below is, rather than two separate parking garages, maybe one large parking garage, so that you can have that north-south connector really be that pedestrian experience that we're looking to have. And I know that, today that's not fully built out, but that's really what we're looking to create with each new development that happens within this area. But I went right into the negatives, and I didn't even talk about the things that I am really excited about, because there are at least a couple. I appreciate you taking the time and investing into the LEED certification. I know that that's not something that just comes easily. It's an investment and it's a priority, so thank you for doing that. And ultimately, it's a beautiful building. I think that this is why Commissioner Padilla was saying, right, like, there wasn't much community opposition to this. It's a beautiful building, especially comparing it to what's there today. I think that there is a lot of excitement to see evolution happen on this site. I am nervous about breaking it into the two phases, and that was going to be like my first thing too. So I thought that was funny that Commissioner Alkire kind of said, 2 hours ago, that was where he was nervous, because I really was too. Especially with like the potential looming of a surface parking lot just doesn't feel good. But I also really like the way Commissioner Bennett kind of weighed the trade-offs of for us as a city and really being driven by these guidelines that we have, it's about the pedestrian experience. And so I would much rather stomach a temporary, underlined, bold, whatever, parking lot in order to get more of that pedestrian experience that I know we want to prioritize across this site. I also am pretty nervous about the service vehicle plan. And I think you even mentioned this, right? That you haven't gone through and done all of the circulation and know the turn radius that is going to be needed. But from my review of these plans on the Planning Commission, there's nowhere here that I see that feels like this is going to be the natural spot for service vehicles. So I think that that's going to be pretty tight and is maybe one of the benefits of adding that entrance right directly off of Gallagher into the parking ramp is it might make some of that a little bit easier. I'm missing a door. I won't say whether it's the front or the back door, but I'm missing a door off of France. Because to me, yes, there's not a lot of traffic, pedestrian or otherwise there today, but there never will be if we don't create the opportunities for that. And so as I'm thinking about where is this coffee shop going to be, or how are people who are not working out of this building going to interact, I want it to be inviting. And that's one way that it can be. And the only other example that I can think of right now is Room and Board, a couple of sites up. But even that, right, is I was looking up the imagery, that's just a sidewalk that goes into Room and Board, and it doesn't even continue on. You have to I don't even think they have steps, right? So it's not quite there. But when I go shopping there, I've enjoyed being able to walk along France and feel that connectivity. So I would like to see more of that here. And I think that was the bulk of my comments. So thank you. Any follow-on comments to any of that? Okay. Any motions?
I'm not going to pretend to make a motion right now, but what I will say is that, like I mentioned, and maybe not so clearly, but I would support this if there were a condition about the north-south connection being separated use between pedestrian and bike. And, the repercussions are there's probably a bunch of design changes that have to happen, as well as use cases, which involves relying on temporary parking on that north side. That is where I'm at. So I would support it if these couple things could be in play to make the north-south connection for pedestrians and bikes to be a separated corridor.
You sounded pretty close to a motion. You could just go for it.
I feel like it's one of those things that, the city council ultimately is making the decision. So, it could just be this, I guess it could be a more informal condition, at least for them to know on, and sometimes the design team's able to make some changes or at least visual attempts in between, because we have two of these, I don't know if someone could take what I said and put words in my mouth.
You were so close, Jimmy. I don't know why you just didn't do it. I mean, I like that approach for me because, based on the progress and the hard work that the team has done, it doesn't feel right to me to deny it. It doesn't feel good to me to deny it. And the way that you phrased it, I thought was great. So you want me to give it a try?
Yeah, you got it.
Question.
Yes, please.
Before you. Yeah. So you're saying, Jimmy, that you want to separate the pedestrian and the bike from the vehicles? Yes. Okay. So pedestrians and bikes could be on the same path, but just vehicles off of that path.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
Or separated, but just separated from vehicle.
Gotcha.
Is the priority.
I'd make a motion to recommend, to approve the, hang on, let me start over again. Make a motion to approve zoning ordinance amendment to revise PUD 16 zoning district to include a new overall development plan and site plan review for 7200 and 7250 France Avenue with the condition that on the north-south connector, bike and pedestrian access is separated from vehicle traffic.
I'll second that.
In addition to the staff findings and other conditions. Sorry.
Subject to the
Yes.
findings and conditions in the staff memo. We need a new second now,
Second.
right?
Yeah, I think that that was a fine motion to be under consideration. You're just seeing my consideration now, because I think that that's one piece of it, right? The north-south connector, I think, is maybe my biggest concern, but I'm also thinking about the rest of the pedestrian experience throughout. But I don't know that in and of itself warrants an additional amendment to your motion. So that's what I was noodling on. All right. Do we feel ready to do a vote?
They're open to friendly amendments.
I was just going to say, it sounds so simple, right? Right?
All right. So all those in favor of, and I'm going to summarize the motion, approving based on the finding and conditions within the staff memo, in addition to separating the north-south connector pedestrian and bicycle traffic from vehicle traffic. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So
Thanks
being
very
passed
much.
on to the city council, thank you so much for coming in and for all of the long discussion on this and the great work that you put into it. Thank you. Okay, so we only have one item left on our agenda, which is our 2023 work plan. So the hope is that, well, not the hope, this is actually the work that we need to do. We need to approve that work plan, and then it will be passed along for other review, and usually after that other review we get a little bit of feedback, and I see that there are usually additional changes from that before the actual document that is presented to the city council in December-ish, if I remember.
Correct.
All
So,
right.
yeah, the hope is to approve the work plan tonight for Chair Agnew to present to the city council on October 6th. And then the city council ultimately would approve it at that meeting, first meeting in December.
Thank you. I'll have to double check my calendar. So, Director T, were you gonna walk through the items? And I'm just thinking we go item by item, kind of just give the nod if it's all good, or speak up if there are any changes. And then once we go through each item, we will vote on the work plan in its entirety.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. So initiative number 1, this is the continuation year after year after year, your main duty, just reviewing land use applications, just like you did this evening. So not much really to discuss there. So I'll just move to initiative 2, which is the continuation and finishing up of the Cahill District Plan. The ultimate deliverable here is we create the document, the small area plan, or the district plan. It's not necessarily small, but leads continue to be Agnew and Alkire. And the hope is, so we would make recommendation to the city council and they would adopt it as part of the comprehensive plan. So if we're okay with that one, we'll move to initiative 3, which is the consideration of future parking in Edina. So the continuation of, well, we've got the ordinance passed. As we saw this evening, this project didn't meet the regulations that we've established. Clearly, we're much closer than we were, but nonetheless, this is that next step. And leads on this one would be Alkire with assists from Miranda and Strauss. The deliverable here would be a recommendation to the city council with whatever we come up with. Any discussion, or are we okay with that one?
The only thing that I will call out is there has already been discussion, right, or at least a reach out to both the Energy and Environment Commission as well as the Transportation Commission. So this is the one that we have on our plan that's a real great joint effort across commissions within the city.
All right, excellent. Initiative number 4 is actually one that we're working on currently. Commissioner Olson is the lead with Bennett to assist. It's the development review and sketch plan process. So we'll be gathering up some research, making a recommendation to the city council, and probably the steps next year would be if there's a recommendation from the city council, we establish an ordinance to follow whatever that process that we decide upon. Initiative number 5 is considering the next areas of potential change that would be our next small area planning efforts. Ultimately this, well, unless we take them on before we start the next comprehensive plan, I would see this incorporating, well, one of 2 ways. We either start a small area plan if that's decided upon, or it gets put into the next comprehensive plan, which will be coming up here sooner than we than we realize. This one, the lead is Miranda with assist from Commissioner Bennett.
I'd like to be an assist on that as well.
Could I ask a quick question on this one? In the comprehensive plan review process that would be coming up really fast, how are small area plans incorporated into that comprehensive plan? What's the process for that?
Yeah, so we took them on during the whole process. So they're adopted as a chapter within the comprehensive plan.
So if we do nothing here, it would get caught in that process essentially.
I think this lays the groundwork for what we want to do as part of the comprehensive plan. I think this is a really good initiative here to start thinking about it and how we want to lay out the next comprehensive plan.
I guess, so one thing just think about during public hearings when people attest to like this contradicts the comprehensive plan or it supports it. I mean, you start with those small area plans. That just helps us better tailor the comprehensive plan to that area. So it is the comprehensive plan. I mean, it's a part of it. It's not necessarily something separate or because it's adopted. I guess the only one that isn't really is the grand view. Which is,
right. It drills down in a little more detail than the big picture comprehensive plan.
And I think the other distinction potentially being that some of these that you might be looking at have never had a small area plan related to them. So it's not like we're going to go through and like update things and these would just be common course of updating. These are, should we identify new areas that need to be looked at and addressed, that very well, if we didn't do this effort, could be missed again in the next comprehensive plan.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, initiative number 6 is the accessory dwelling unit. Again, another continuation of what's happening now. we're in that research and recommend phase for this year. So the anticipation is next year, whatever we decide and discuss with the city council, it becomes an ordinance proposal that we would present to the city council for next year. And we have the work session that we've tentatively scheduled for November 16th to keep that project moving. So that would be that one. Any discussion on that?
Just a quick question. Would we need to circulate, I'm guessing I'll have to circulate some stuff before that meeting so folks have time to look at it, digest it, and come with questions. So maybe the meeting is going to be on 11/16, but maybe you get an email with a deck a week prior, like how we get our packets before this meeting.
Yep, that's a good idea. If we think that there's going to be a lot to digest, we could send it out in advance. We can talk about that offline.
Okay.
But at minimum, it would be in the packet the week before. Okay. And the last initiative is, oh no, we've got two more. Consider the climate action plan and investigate what we can put into city code. We've talked about different ways of doing that, but maybe it's part of a conditional use permit conditions or maybe something else. But it's to really dig into the climate action plan and see if there's something that we can't put into code. Leads are Smith and Padilla on that one. And the last one is a zoning ordinance amendment regarding commercial landscaping with a potential for an ordinance change if we think that's appropriate. And the leads are Alkire and Olson.
Gary, are these calendar years?
Yes.
So can we make that December?
Sure.
Thanks.
And that's it. If we're in agreement, I would ask that the Planning Commission take a vote. And the next step would be for the chair to present to City Council on October 6th.
So in some ways, like looking through this, and I think Carrie even like mentioned this, right? Like, oh my gosh, there's another one. There's 8 initiatives. It feels like a lot, but the reason that I'm comfortable with going forward with this plan is, one, some of these items are a continuation, and I don't think that they're going to go that deep into the year. The other is that we will obviously have new commissioners in the new year as well, and so those people will be joining into these efforts. And then 3, whatever we don't get done rolls on to the next year, which like kind of a safety net, but ideally we would be tackling as much as we think we can, but if things slow down or things get in the way or various things come up, that doesn't mean that we have to stop working on it. And I think that these all feel like meaningful things for the commission to be working on. Right? Like if we started to take anything off, I wouldn't want to touch anything related to climate change or the ADUs or parking, right? And so I think that it's all the right stuff for us to be taking on as a commission. That's all.
I move to approve the 2023 Planning Commission work plan.
A second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it is approved. Thank you. I will report back after October 6th, which is going to be fun. Chair and member comments.
Comment, if we do take the city council, they could add stuff onto that if they saw something or remove things from that list. What are your thoughts
I've never
there?
seen them add anything personally, and I don't think that they would add if we had 8 items on there already. But I have definitely seen them remove items. But I don't know, Carrie, if you want to speak to that too.
Yeah, I think that's true. I believe when we started the parking ordinance, it was added to the work plan, but that happened like in the middle of the year. Yeah.
Any other comments?
I had a couple things real quick.
Please.
First, in my absence at the last meeting, Commissioner Miranda was kind enough to talk through the tree ordinance and get an advisory communication from the Planning Commission for that, so thank you for doing that. And at the council meeting on the 7th, I think it was, John Haugen from Energy and Environment presented it. And I don't know if anybody else had a chance to watch it, but I thought he did a great job. And the city council, you can never tell until it's done, but my impression was that the city council was really supportive of it. In fact, they went to a second reading to try to agree in this round on some boulevard tree language to really get the whole thing done rather than defer some of the things that John was saying we could defer. So I thought it went really great and optimistic that it's going to be passed. Like I say, you never know until it's done, but it felt good. Anyway, everybody who spoke seemed supportive. Secondly, last night we had our second community workshop for the Cahill district. Commissioner Miranda was there, and I thought it went well. We didn't have 100 people like we had last time, but we had a decent sized group. It was 20, 25 maybe, and I thought the process that we came up with, our team came up with for the event was really effective and good, and got the kind of feedback that we needed at this stage in the process. I don't know if you had anything to add. I continue to feel really good about Bolton and Mank, who are the lead consultants that we hired to help us out with this. They seem to be really doing a nice job and making things easy for us, but leading towards an effective outcome. So that's it.
The only thing I'll add to your first comment about the tree ordinance and us writing, or what did we even officially call it, like a endorsement or a letter of support? Thank you, the advisory communication. I think for me, that was a good reminder that we can do those and that we can think creatively of how we can do those. Like one that I didn't even think of until that one came out is when we presented the parking ordinance, we could have potentially worked with the Energy and Environment Commission because as a part of the climate action plan, one of the action is to, I think, eliminate parking minimums. And so that could have been a good partnership. And it went through, right? So we didn't need it. But I think where we can look for opportunities to join together with other commissions, that will just help amplify the work that all the commissions are doing.
Just had one tagline comment on the tree ordinance too. I think I felt not a little caught off guard, but it felt good to support that. But at the same time, I know I didn't do as much homework as I normally would before I support something. And so I feel like it would have been more important for me to understand all the different angles of how you would look at that ordinance, specifically from like the developer's perspective or someone developing land and what those repercussions might be with the specifics on that. And that's the one thing I still feel like I don't have enough perspective on, but still supported. And it's just something I've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks of, those, and Commissioner Smith brought it up too, is like, is this 100 small trees per inch? But like, if it were, or if it weren't, and you take down a really large tree, which we're trying not to, that's a significant investment, and maybe there's spatial constraints that prevent you from even doing anything there, which I think would be a bad intended consequence. Just for a tree, so I did, I would have liked to see the science behind that and what certain cost things would have been. I just feel like, and I'm sure there's more of that in that, but I would like to just, study up on that some more and just review the council meeting. I didn't get to see that presentation, so.
Yeah, it was a little unfortunate that I wasn't able to be here at the time when I was asking you to do an advisory communication, because I'd been immersed in that stuff for a while and probably could have helped with some of the questions that I saw coming up on video. It's like, I wish I was there for that. But, and I know I probably sent it out early, but there's not nobody has time to like wade their way through all that stuff.
Well, because, I mean, usually, like, we have some sort of public hearing or there's a presentation, so then it's like I start thinking, oh, I'm going to support this, but then by the end of that, you know, you've been on this journey and you've seen different angles. I just feel like I didn't have that journey, so, and I was having it the last couple of weeks of just my own mind running off and then talking to neighbors and other things. You know, I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't know if there are other angles to that just from the development side, or, you know, if the city council had feedback from other parties that might affect, that came up during that meeting or not, that you'd be willing to share, or if they were just supportive of it as is.
Yeah, I don't remember any, that what you're mentioning doesn't bring any particular content of the meeting to mind. There was we had an advisory communication. There was another one from Transportation, I guess it was, Commission. Yeah. And the questions from the council were, you know, not particularly, you know, deep or like dug into any unexpected areas. So I really don't think I can share anything on that.
Okay. Let's talk later. Okay. But no, that just came to mind. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Bennett on this one with regards to being a little bit more prepared on the information. I didn't get time to get us up to speed as I would have liked. I would also add that it should also be on the agenda, because there was in the comment section, I think is when it came up. It should have been an agenda item that we had clearly outlined for us to focus on. I think that would have been good. Like Commissioner Bennett, I've been thinking about it. I've been to a couple engagements, social engagements, where they were developers and they were asking me about it. And I'm like, okay, you know, here's what I think. And yes, we approved. And then, of course, you know, the city council reviewed it. They had some questions on some sections, you know, for the team to go back and update. And I wasn't so sure what those sections were, because I wasn't as up to speed as I would have liked. So I think that's an important thing from a process perspective, to include those on the agenda. Different topic. So tonight I thought it was really good having the team who presented that sketch plan. I know we've put them through the ringer on giving us feedback, and I think they've done a great job of incorporating our feedback and bringing that forward. But the whole WUNRF concept, right, from a design experience, I think it's a good call out to really try to stress that we want that space eventually in the future to be a comfortable, you know, walkable, bikeable space that folks feel comfortable, and there's limited traffic. You know, let these streets coming in have some traffic, let France have traffic, but this corridor should be a nice walkable space. So I appreciate all the commissioners that kind of voiced that and share some really good comments there. Even though this team, I know, have done a really good job incorporating a lot of the feedback from the last meeting and bringing it forward in this one. So I thought it was a really good discussion. I hope they're not discouraged, and I hope they come back with so many changes that we approved.
Any other comments before we go to staff? Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, speaking of advisory communications, I just wanted to point out that we, in the past month or so, we looked at a proposal or a sketch plan from the Lifetime Residential Development in Southdale. And there was some discussion among commissioners about the location of the transit center. And I just wanted to point out that the Transportation Commission sent an advisory communication to the City Council on that topic. And basically, in one line, the action requested was the Transportation Commission seeks council's support of Metro Transit and Metropolitan Council prioritizing the restoration of transit service within Edina to support the city's commitment to transportation of all types and to serve all residents. And so they specifically mentioned the E-Line project and the Lifetime Residential Development. And they further suggest that the putting the transit center on the south part of the Southdale Center along 69th Street to further center it within the Southdale area, and that's kind of what's talked about in the Southdale guidelines, and having a transportation corridor there. So so they had similar concerns that we had, and they provided an advisory communication to the City Council. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
Just a quick update from actions that the council took at their last meeting. They approved the Fred 2 project. That's the apartment on 77th. So that was approved, and they also approved the townhomes at 4404 Valley View Road, the old Burley site. They had a public hearing on the Grandview Yard, and they will take action on it the same night that they do the tree ordinance next week. That's it.
All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.